The rooftop gravel crunched under Cole Maddox's boots as he shifted position behind the HVAC unit, 300 yards of cold Chicago air separating him from the restaurant's rear service entrance. 11:47, same time as the previous 46 nights. The night vision scope brought Emma Hayes into sharp relief as she emerged through the kitchen door, her thin jacket doing nothing against the October wind that rolled off Lake Michigan. She paused to retie her shoelaces. The left one always came undone around this time, cheap department store. Flats falling apart after too many 12-hour shifts, and Cole logged it in his notebook with the same precision he'd once used to track enemy movements in Fallujah. Subject Emma Hayes, day 47. Night at shift ends 12:15 a.m. Walks home alone through Southside. Route unchanged. Threat assessment elevated. The words meant something different now than they had 8 weeks ago, when Father Brennan had shuffled into his office at Sentinel Security manila folder, clutched in arthritic hands that still bore the scars of shrapnel from Quezon. The old priest's voice had carried that particular weight that came from men who'd seen too much death and couldn't stomach one more senseless loss. She reminds me of your Katie, son. Same age she would have been, same spirit, and she's in trouble but doesn't know it yet. Cole had taken the folder because you didn't say no to Father Brennan, not when the old man had given last rites to half your platoon in the Korengal Valley, not when he'd been the only one who showed up to Sarah and Katie's funeral while the rest of the world moved on like a drunk driver, killing a wife and daughter, was just another Thursday statistic. The photo inside had punched him in the gut, not because Emma Hayes looked anything like Katie, but because she had that same quality Sarah used to talk about, the kind of person who'd give you their last dollar and apologize it wasn't more. 5 weeks of background checks had painted the picture. Emma Elizabeth Hayes, 29, former CPA at Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's top accounting firms. Implicated in Blake Mercer's $8.3 million Ponzi scheme, but never charged because the evidence showed what Cole's gut had already told him: she'd been a mark, not a partner. Smart girl with a trusting heart, and Blake Mercer had used that trust like a crowbar to pry open every professional door she'd locked behind her credentials. The fraud had collapsed 2 years ago. Blake had vanished with the money. Emma had lost everything: her career, her reputation, her belief that the world made sense. Now she washed dishes at Castellano's and served coffee at Chen's Diner, 2 jobs barely covering rent, on a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where gunshots were the evening soundtrack. Cole had watched her apartment the first week catalog the broken locks and busted fire escapes, the dealers working the corner, and the addicts nodding off in the stairwell. He'd made a call to an old Marine buddy in CPD to get extra patrols. Nothing official, just brothers looking out for civilians who deserved better than the hand they had been dealt. But the patrols hadn't stopped the black SUV with tinted windows that started appearing 3 weeks into surveillance. Professional tail-rotating vehicles, first the Escalade, then a Lincoln Navigator, then a Suburban, all expensive and all wrong for this neighborhood. The kind of transportation that moved people who didn't want to be seen. Cole had run the plates through channels that technically didn't exist anymore. Favors called in from his time running black ops in places the government swore Americans had never set foot. Every vehicle came back registered to shell corporations that led to more shell corporations, the kind of financial labyrinth that screamed organized crime or intelligence work, and sometimes the line between the two was razor thin. Someone was hunting Emma Hayes. She just didn't know it yet. Movement on the street below pulled Cole's attention back to immediate threats. The Suburban rolled to a stop across from Castellano's same parking spot as the last 6 nights. 2 men exited, and even from 300 yards, Cole could read their body language, the way they moved with weapons concealed under tailored suits, the constant scanning that marks security professionals, the casual arrogance of men who believe themselves untouchable. They posted up near the corner eyes on the service entrance, where Emma would exit in 28 minutes. Cole thumbed his radio. "Mac, I'm going active. Target's compromised." Static, then Mac Sullivan's gravel road voice crackled back, still carrying the authority of the gunnery sergeant who'd kept Cole's squad alive through 3 tours. "Roger that, boss. I'm 2 minutes out." The decision calculus was simple. 47 days of observation meant Cole knew Emma's patterns better than she did, the way she always checked her phone, walking to the bus stop, the route she took that added 10 minutes, but avoided the worst blocks, the pepper spray in her purse that gave her false confidence in a city that didn't care about her safety. The surveillance team knew those patterns too. Tonight, they'd stopped watching and started positioning, and in Cole's experience, that meant the mission parameters had changed from observation to action. He secured his gear with practiced efficiency, the movements automatic after 25 years of preparing for violence. Sig Sauer P-26 in the shoulder holster, backup Glock 19 at his ankle, tactical folder clipped inside his jacket pocket. Body armor under his shirt because you didn't walk into unknown situations without it, not if you planned on walking back out. The night vision scope went into its case, replaced by standard optics for the shorter range work about to unfold. 47 days watching. Tonight that ended. Cole took the fire escape down, boots silent on the metal grating, despite his 200-pound frame. At 51, he'd lost a step from his prime, but the step he'd lost was from Olympic sprinter to merely fast, and the trade-off had bought him patience and judgment that his 25-year-old self couldn't have imagined. The young Marine had been all aggression and certainty. The older version understood that violence was a tool, not a solution, and the best fights were the ones you never had to have. The street-level approach put him at Castellano's front entrance 4 minutes ahead of schedule. The maitre d' looked up with the expression that expensive restaurants reserved for people who didn't fit their clientele. Cole's tactical pants and worn leather jacket screamed working class in a place where entrees cost more than Emma's daily wage. But the Platinum American Express card, Cole slid across the podium, changed the calculation immediately. Table for one. Quiet corner. The words carried command weight, the tone that expected compliance and generally received it. The maitre d's resistance evaporated into professional courtesy as he led Cole to a corner booth that gave clear sight lines to all entrances, back to the wall, no windows behind him. Basic tactical positioning, but civilians never noticed until someone pointed it out. Cole ordered bourbon neat, more for cover than consumption, and settled in to watch. Castellano's interior lived up to its reputation. White tablecloths and crystal chandeliers, the soft murmur of power brokers making deals over Barolo and osso buco, classical music from hidden speakers, trying to create ambiance that money could buy, but never quite achieve. The dinner crowd was winding down, just the serious drinkers and the couples stretching dessert into foreplay, and the serving staff moved through it all with the invisible efficiency of people who'd learned that making eye contact meant getting blamed for things that weren't their fault. Emma worked the bus station near the kitchen, stacking dirty dishes with mechanical precision, and Cole watched her the way he'd once watched villages in Helmand Province, cataloging the small details that revealed larger truths. She flinched when the male servers passed too close. She kept her eyes down, making herself small, the body language of someone who'd learned that attention meant danger. Her uniform hung loose on a frame that had lost too much weight, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke to the kind of exhaustion that sleep didn't fix. 2 years of running had carved survival instincts into her nervous system, but survival instincts without training were just fear with better reflexes. She needed someone to teach her the difference between hiding and defending, between running and standing ground. Cole had taught that lesson to hundreds of Marines. Teaching it to one scared accountant wouldn't be harder. The bus tub in her arms was overloaded, rookie mistake, trying to save trips instead of maintaining control, and Cole saw the disaster unfolding before Emma registered the danger. Her left shoe caught on the carpet edge, the cheap sole, already worn smooth from too many miles, walked on too little money. Time compressed the way it always did in combat. Everything slowing while your brain accelerated, running threat assessments and response options in the microseconds before physics took over. Cole moved. 5 strides brought him into intercept position as Emma stumbled forward, the bus tub tilting toward catastrophic failure. He caught her elbow with his right hand, steadying her weight, while his left hand secured the tub before gravity could claim it. Most of the dishes survived. A single wine glass slipped through, hitting the marble floor with the particular sound of expensive crystal meeting hard reality. Red wine Barolo, probably the $15,300 a bottle, splashed across Cole's boots in an arc that would have been impressive if it wasn't going to stain the Italian leather he'd bought in Florence during a deployment that officially never happened. Emma's face went white, and Cole saw genuine terror in her eyes, the kind that came from too many consequences piled on top of too many disasters. Her mouth-shaped apologies that came out barely louder than breathing. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. Cole's voice cut through her panic with the calm certainty of someone who'd talked down suicidal Marines and shell-shocked civilians in a dozen war zones. You're all right, it's just wine. The restaurant had gone silent, that particular hush that followed unexpected violence or unexpected grace, and every head had turned to watch the drama unfold. Mr. Castellano materialized from the kitchen like a genie summoned by property damage, his face cycling through shock and calculation as he took in the scene. Broken crystal spilled wine. One of his busiest nights interrupted by hired help who couldn't manage basic motor skills. Sir, I apologize, she'll be fired immediately. This kind of... The words died as Cole turned his attention to Castellano, and whatever the restaurant owner saw in that gaze made him reconsider his next sentence. Cole pulled 5 $100 bills from his wallet, laid them on the nearest table with the deliberate care of someone making a point. For the wine and her shift, she's done for tonight. He turned back to Emma, and this close he could see the fine tremor in her hands, the way her pupils had dilated with stress hormones, the pulse hammering in her throat. This close he could also see the intelligence in her eyes, the strength that hadn't quite broken, despite everything Blake Mercer and the world had thrown at her. Go get your things. I'm taking you home. The terror in her expression shifted to confusion, then the first spark of something that might have been resistance if she'd had the energy for it. I can't. You don't even know. Cole's voice stayed level, but he pitched it lower just for her. I know that in about 3 minutes, 2 men in a black Suburban are going to walk through that door looking for you. I know they've been watching you for 3 weeks. I know they're done watching. Emma's confusion crystallized into fear, the sharp-edged kind that came from confirmation of paranoia you'd been trying to convince yourself was crazy. What Cole pulled out his phone showed her the surveillance photo he'd taken 2 nights ago, the Suburban, the 2 men license plate visible. Her hand came up to her mouth, and for a moment he thought she might break completely. But she didn't. Instead, something hardened in her expression, the survival instinct overriding the fear. Who are you? The question deserved honesty, or at least as much honesty as operational security allowed. Cole Maddox, I run Sentinel Security. Father Brennan hired me to keep you alive. Recognition flickered across her face at the priest's name, though Cole could see her trying to make the connections, trying to figure out why an elderly priest she barely knew would hire private security for a nobody working 2 jobs in a city that didn't care if she lived or died. Father Brennan, I only met him twice at the shelter. I don't understand. Understanding could come later. Right now, immediate action kept people breathing. He knows you, and he knows when someone's carrying weight they can't handle alone. Now move. We're leaving through the kitchen. Cole's hand found her elbow again, firm, but not rough, the grip that allowed guidance without coercion. He steered her toward the kitchen as the front door opened, and 2 men in dark suits entered, their eyes already scanning the dining room with professional efficiency. Cole felt the weight of their attention sweep across him, and Emma hesitate, calculate. Through the kitchen doors before they could commit to a decision, before the situation escalated from surveillance to confrontation. The kitchen staff barely looked up as Cole and Emma passed through, just another piece of restaurant chaos in an evening that had probably seen worse. The service entrance opened onto an alley that smelled like garbage and grease, and Max Sullivan stood beside Cole's truck with the easy readiness of a man who'd spent 30 years preparing for violence that usually didn't come, but sometimes did. Boss. 2 tangos entering front. Mac was built like the brick wall he'd held in Ramadi when insurgents had tried to overrun their position, gray beard and Marine Corps tattoo sleeve visible despite the cold. His hand rested near his jacket in the universal signal of a man carrying concealed, and his eyes tracked the alley approaches with the constant vigilance that never quite left even 15 years after retirement. We're out the back. You're on overwatch. Mac's grin showed the gap where a Taliban rifle butt had claimed a molar in Sangin. Like old times, sir. The F-250 waited 30 feet down the alley, armored panels hidden under civilian paint windows, rated for small arms fire, that looked like regular glass until bullets started flying. Cole had learned in Fallujah that the difference between coming home and coming home in a box often came down to the quality of your ride, and he'd spent serious money making sure Sentinel's vehicles gave his people every advantage Detroit engineering could provide. Emma balked at the truck door, and Cole could see her brain finally catching up to the adrenaline, finally processing that she was about to get into a vehicle with a stranger who claimed to be protecting her from other strangers she hadn't known were watching. The fear was healthy. The hesitation was smart. But smart hesitation in the wrong moment got you killed. You can trust me, or you can go back inside and see what those men want. Your call. The words were harsh but necessary, and Emma's face showed the moment she made the calculation, weighed the devil she knew against the devil she didn't, and decided that at least this devil had kept her from getting fired, and maybe worse. She climbed into the truck. Cole took the wheel as Max slid into the back seat, his presence both reassurance and reminder that whatever came next, they'd face it as brothers. The truck's engine turned over with the deep rumble of the upgraded V8 Cole had installed, more horsepower than necessary for civilian driving, but exactly what you wanted when vehicles started chasing you through urban terrain. He pulled out of the alley as the two suits emerged from Castellano's rear entrance, their expressions showing the particular frustration of hunters who just realized their prey had slipped the trap. Emma's voice shook, but she was still asking questions, still processing instead of shutting down. "Where are we going, Sentinel HQ?" "Secure location, armed guards. We need to figure out who those men are and what they want." The drive through Chicago's downtown gave Cole time to watch Emma in his peripheral vision, cataloging her reactions as the adrenaline started to fade and shock set in. She kept looking at the side mirror, like the Suburban might materialize behind them. Her hands gripped the seatbelt hard enough to show white knuckles. But she wasn't crying and wasn't begging to be let out, wasn't dissolving into the kind of panic that made civilians liabilities in crisis situations. She was scared but functional, and functional was all Cole needed to work with. Sentinel Security's headquarters occupied a converted warehouse in the South Loop, 3 stories of reinforced concrete that had once stored industrial equipment and now housed the kind of security operation that kept low-profile but high-value clients breathing in a world that wanted them dead. The exterior looked abandoned by design graffiti on the walls. Broken windows on the first floor replaced with bulletproof glass that looked like regular broken glass from a distance, the kind of urban camouflage that made criminals walk past without a second glance. The garage entrance responded to a coded frequency from the truck, the heavy steel door rolling up to admit them before slamming closed with finality that Emma clearly felt in her bones. She looked around the garage, 3 other vehicles, all armored, all maintained to military specifications, and Cole watched understanding dawn in her eyes. "This is your military." The past tense was complicated, but Cole nodded because it was close enough to truth. Was 25 years Marine Corps Force Recon. Now I protect people who need it. He led her through security protocols that would have impressed most federal buildings. Biometric scanners, dual authentication doors, hardened checkpoints that forced attackers into kill zones if they somehow made it past the first 3 layers of defense. The command center occupied the 3rd floor open space, filled with computer monitors and tactical maps, weapons locker in the corner coffee pot that never emptied, because Doc Harrison believed caffeine was the 5th food group after bullets, beans, and Band-Aids. Doc looked up from his laptop as they entered former Navy corpsmen who'd patched Marines back together in Ramadi and now served as Sentinel's tech specialist and medic. At 49, he'd kept the fitness standards that had carried him through Bodhi's training before his knees gave out, and he'd lateraled to corpsman duties, and his eyes held the particular weariness that came from watching too many good people die from bad wounds. "Boss, running plates on that Suburban now." Cole guided Emma to a chair near the coffee station, and her eyes tracked every movement in the room, every piece of equipment, every detail that might help her understand what kind of situation she'd stumbled into. Mac appeared with coffee in a mug that said Semper Fi in faded letters, and Emma took it with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "Tell me about Blake Mercer." The question made Emma's face go still, and Cole saw the careful walls going up, the practiced deflection of someone who'd answered these questions too many times for FBI agents and lawyers and journalists who wanted a villain or a victim and didn't much care which role she played. How do you, Cole, cut through the deflection with the direct honesty that came from not having time for games? "I know everything. The fraud, the FBI investigation, your destroyed reputation. What I don't know is why someone's still hunting you 2 years later." The walls cracked and Emma's voice came out small and lost. "I thought he took the money and disappeared." "That's what the FBI said. That's what everyone said." Cole pulled up a chair across from her, close enough to show investment, but far enough to avoid crowding the interview distance. He'd learned from thousands of debriefs with Marines who'd seen things they couldn't quite verbalize. Tell me what Blake told you, not what the FBI thinks. What he said in private when it was just the two of you. Emma's eyes went distant, remembering conversations she'd probably replayed a million times, looking for the warning signs she'd missed. He talked about insurance, documents he kept in case things went wrong. He was paranoid about digital set hackers could steal anything online, but physical ledgers were safe. He'd joke about his retirement fund, the evidence that made him untouchable. Cole leaned forward. Did he ever say where he kept these ledgers? Emma shook her head, but her expression showed she was still processing, still following the thread. He mentioned encryption keys, offshore account numbers. He said even God couldn't find them. I thought he was just being dramatic. Blake always exaggerated. Mac and Doc exchanged glances, and Cole saw they'd reached the same conclusion he had. Blake Mercer hadn't just run a Ponzi scheme. He'd kept records insurance against his partners turning on him, and someone wanted those records badly enough to stake out a restaurant kitchen for 3 weeks, waiting for the one person who might know where they were hidden. Doc's laptop chimed, and he swore softly. Boss got the vehicle registration. Suburban's owned by Vale Transport, LLC. That's a shell corp, but I traced the ownership chain. He turned his monitor around and Cole felt his gut tighten as he read the name at the end of the corporate daisy chain. Victor Kane Enterprises. The room went quiet and Mac's face showed he'd recognized the name instantly. Cole forced himself to breathe evenly to keep his expression neutral because Emma didn't need to see the rage that name triggered, didn't need to know that Victor Kane was the reason Cole understood exactly how far men could fall when they stopped believing honor mattered more than profit. You know that name? Emma's voice was tentative but observant, and Cole gave her credit for reading the room despite everything else competing for her attention. Victor Kane, my former commanding officer in Black Ops, went private sector 15 years ago. Security consulting for dictators and cartels. The sanitized version left out the part where Kane had orchestrated the assassination of a village elder who'd been feeding intel to Marines, called it acceptable losses, when Cole objected and smiled while explaining that clean hands didn't build empires. Left out the formal complaint Cole had filed that went nowhere because Kane had friends in places where complaints disappeared. Left out the day Cole decided that if the system wouldn't hold Kane accountable, Cole would make sure their paths never crossed again. Apparently, the universe had other plans. If Kane's involved, this isn't about money anymore. Mac's voice carried the flat certainty of someone stating obvious facts. Emma looked between them, trying to understand the subtext that filled the room like smoke. Then what's it about? Cole met her eyes, and he didn't sugarcoat it because she deserved to know what she was facing. Loose ends. You're a witness who can connect Blake to the fraud. Blake can connect Kane to 50 other crimes. They're cleaning house. The words hung in the air, and Emma processed them with the kind of terrible clarity that came from finally understanding that your paranoia wasn't paranoia at all, that the feeling of being watched wasn't anxiety, but accurate threat assessment. What do I do? The question was simple, but the weight behind it was everything: her life, her future, her fragile belief that maybe the world could still make sense if you just found the right angle. Cole had heard that question in Fallujah from Marines who'd watched their friends die in Chicago, from clients who'd received death threats they couldn't explain. The answer was always the same, and it always meant making promises he might not be able to keep. You let me protect you. That's what I do. Father Brennan chose that moment to arrive, his timing either divine intervention or the result of Mac texting him the second Emma had entered the building. The old priest moved slowly, joints stiff from decades of carrying other people's burdens, but his eyes still held the sharp awareness of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst and somehow maintained faith in its capacity for better. Child. I'm sorry I brought this to your door. Emma stood, and Cole saw genuine affection in the way she moved toward Brennan, the kind of connection that formed between people who'd shared vulnerability without judgment. Father, I don't understand. Why would you hire someone to protect me? We barely know each other. Brennan's weathered face creased with a sad smile. Because you reminded me of someone I failed to protect long ago. Because Cole is the best man I know for keeping innocents safe. And because sometimes grace works through secular hands. He turned to Cole, and the look between them carried 20 years of shared history, The funerals, the confessions, the long nights when Cole had raged against God and Brennan had listened without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Tell her son she deserves to know why you're doing this. Cole's jaw tightened, and he wanted to tell Brennan that operational details stayed operational, that personal history was irrelevant to mission success. But Emma was watching him with those eyes that had already seen too much betrayal, and she needed to understand that this wasn't just a job, that Cole had skin in the game beyond whatever Father Brennan was paying. I lost my wife and daughter 5 years ago. Drunk driver head-on collision. Sarah was 48, Katie was 24 your age. Emma's breath caught, and Cole could see her doing the math, understanding now why Father Brennan had said she reminded him of someone. Katie wanted to help people. She was studying to be a nurse. She used to volunteer at Father Brennan's shelter, the same one where you met him. The same shelter where you probably sat in the same chair Katie sat in, where Father Brennan looked at you and saw another young woman with her whole life ahead of her, another person the world was trying to break before she could bloom. Cole's voice stayed level, but he felt the words cutting on the way out. I couldn't protect them, but I can protect you. The silence that followed carried weight, and Emma's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier than it had been all night. I don't want to be someone's second chance at redemption. I don't want to be your dead daughter's replacement. The honesty was sharp and clean, and Cole respected her for it, even as it landed like a knife between his ribs. You're not. You're Emma Hayes, and you deserve to live without looking over your shoulder. That's enough reason. Emma studied him for a long moment, and whatever she saw must have satisfied something, because she nodded once. Okay, so what happens now? Mac fielded that question, his tactical mind already 3 steps ahead. Now you stay here. Secure location, armed guards. We figure out what Kane wants and how to make this end. Doc pulled up files on his computer, financial records that probably violated 6 federal laws to obtain, but which painted a picture Cole needed to see. Boss, I traced the money from Blake's Ponzi scheme. He didn't steal $8.3 million. The number on screen made Cole's breath catch. He stole $47 million. The FBI only found the first layer. Emma's face went white. That's impossible. The victims, the lawsuits, they only claimed $8 million. Doc's expression was grim. Because Blake was working for someone with serious resources. Someone who could hide money through 50 shell core across 12 countries. He pulled up another screen, and Cole felt his pulse spike as the money trail terminated in a single name. Victor Kane Enterprises. The pieces clicked into place with the terrible clarity of intelligence work when the pattern finally emerged from the noise. Blake Mercer hadn't run a simple fraud. He'd been laundering money for Kane's operation, and the Ponzi scheme had been cover for moving cash from illegal sources into legitimate investments. Emma had been the unwitting accountant who signed off on transactions. She didn't understand her credentials giving Kane's operation the veneer of legitimacy it needed. And now Kane needed to erase the one person who could connect the dots. Cole's phone rang, the number showing as unknown. He stared at it for 2 rings, then answered because avoiding calls from Kane wouldn't make the threat disappear. Maddox. The voice that came through was cultured and smooth, the kind that belonged to boardrooms and country clubs. Nothing in the tone suggesting this was a man who'd ordered assassinations in 3 countries. Hello, Lieutenant Colonel. It's been a long time. Cole's hand tightened on the phone, but his voice stayed level. Kane. Victor Kane's laugh carried genuine warmth, like they were old friends catching up instead of enemies circling each other. I hear you've acquired something of mine, a scared little accountant who doesn't know when to stop asking questions. I'm calling to offer you a deal. The presumption that Cole would negotiate made his blood heat, but anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. He kept his tone neutral. I'm listening, returned the girl. Walk away. I'll transfer $5 million to your account, clean money properly laundered. You can finally retire from playing hero to people who don't matter. The casual dismissal of Emma's life as something that didn't matter crystallized every reason Cole had filed that complaint 15 years ago. Every reason he'd walked away from Black Ops before he became the kind of man who measured human worth in dollars. Not interested. Kane's voice lost the warmth, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. Cole, don't be stupid. She's nobody. A failed accountant with a sob story. Why die for her? Because that's what men like us are supposed to do. Protect the weak. You forgot that when you cashed your integrity for blood money. The silence on the line stretched long enough that Cole wondered if Kane had hung up. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. You're making a mistake. I have resources you can't imagine. Men money connections. I will bury you. Cole thought about Ramadi, about holding a defensive position against overwhelming force, about refusing to yield ground because yielding meant good people died. You can try. But Victor, remember Ramadi. Remember when we were pinned down by 40 insurgents and I got us out? Kane's voice went quiet. I remember. Then remember what I told you. The words came back across 15 years, like they'd been carved in stone. That you don't lose. Cole let the certainty settle into his bones, the same certainty that had carried him through 3 combat tours and 100 impossible situations. I still don't. Come for her, and you'll learn that lesson again. He ended the call before Kane could respond, and the command center went silent as everyone processed what had just happened. Emma's voice was small and terrified. That was him, the man hunting me? Cole nodded already, running contingencies in his head, already planning for the assault that would come now that diplomatic channels had failed. Victor Kane, former Delta Force current war criminal. He'll come with everything he has. Mac was already moving, pulling weapons from the locker, checking magazines and chamber rounds. With the automatic efficiency of a man who'd done this so many times, the movements had become muscle memory. Boss, if Kane's activated his network, we need everyone. Doc, call Reaper and Tommy. This is a full tactical response. Doc was already dialing, and Cole turned to Emma, who looked smaller than she had in the restaurant, the weight of understanding finally crushing down on her. How many people are going to die because of me? The question deserved honesty, but Cole tempered it with the only reassurance he could give. Anyone who dies made the choice to come after an innocent. That's on them, not you. Emma's hands were shaking again, and Cole watched her struggle to process everything that had happened. In the last 90 minutes, her life upended strangers claiming to protect her, revelations about conspiracies she'd never suspected. Most civilians would break under that weight, but Emma's voice when she spoke carried something harder than fear. I can't just hide. I can't be dead weight while people die for me. The sentiment was admirable, but Cole had seen too many untrained people try to help in combat situations, had scraped their bodies off streets in Fallujah when good intentions met bad tactics. You can, and you will. You stay in the secure room. You follow orders. That's how you help. Emma's jaw set with stubborn determination that reminded Cole uncomfortably of Katie, of the way his daughter had argued that nursing school counted as serving, even though Cole had wanted her as far from danger as possible. No, if I'm going to be bait, I want to know how to protect myself. You said you teach people, so teach me. The command center's alarm system chose that moment to light up red LEDs, flashing in sequence that meant the perimeter sensors had detected movement. Doc's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up security feeds that showed 4 men in tactical gear approaching from the north side. Boss, we're hot. 4 tangos incoming. Cole's brain shifted into combat mode, the world narrowing to threat assessment and response planning. He moved to the weapons locker, pulled out a Mossberg 590 shotgun, and spare shells handed them to Mac. All stations weapons free. Protect the principal. The principal was Emma, standing frozen in the middle of the command center as the reality of violence crashed from abstract to immediate. Cole grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the secure room that occupied the building's reinforced core, designed to withstand everything short of sustained artillery fire. Body armor in the closet. Put it on. Lock this door. Don't open it unless you hear my voice. Emma's eyes were wide, but she nodded, and Cole saw her hands already reaching for the armor as he pulled the door closed. The magnetic locks engaged with a solid thunk that meant she was as safe as current technology could make her. Mac's voice came over the building's intercom system. Contact front. Multiple tangos with automatic weapons. The distinctive crack of rifle fire echoed through the building, and Cole moved with the automatic efficiency of a man who'd cleared buildings in Fallujah and Ramadi, who understood angles and cover and the geometry of violence. He reached his position at the second-floor stairwell just as the first attacker rounded the corner. The fight lasted 90 seconds. Cole put controlled pairs into the first 2 targets, center mass mechanical precision that came from 10,000 hours on the range and too many real-world applications. The third attacker managed to get a burst off that chewed concrete near Cole's position, But Mac's shotgun from the opposite angle ended that threat before it could develop. The fourth man retreated to the ground floor, and Cole heard Doc's suppressed pistol cough twice before silence fell. The building's tactical lighting kicked on bright LED floods that turned the warehouse interior into a shooting gallery for defenders and a nightmare for attackers. Cole cleared the ground floor systematically, weapon up, scanning for additional threats. He found the fourth attacker slumped against a support column, Doc standing over him with the calm professionalism that came from treating enemy wounded in Ramadi before they became prisoners. This one's alive. Gonna need an ambulance. Cole approached and the wounded man looked up with eyes that showed the particular fear that came from realizing you'd been fighting above your weight class. Blood soaked through his tactical vest from Doc's precise shot placement, painful but non-lethal, designed to incapacitate without killing. The man's accent marked him as Eastern European, probably Russian, based on the Cyrillic tattoos visible on his forearms. "Who sent you?" The man spat blood, said nothing. Cole crouched down, his voice taking on the flat affect that made interrogation subjects realize cooperation was their best option. "You're bleeding out. Doc here can save you or let you die. Your call." The man's eyes flickered to Doc, measuring, calculating. He made the smart choice. "Kane. Victor Kane sent us." Cole had expected that answer, but hearing confirmation crystallized the situation's severity. Kane had moved from surveillance to direct assault in less than 2 hours, which meant Emma's continued existence represented an immediate threat that required immediate solutions. "Why now? Why tonight?" The man's breathing was labored, but he managed words between gasps. "Blake Mercer surfaced. Chicago PD spotted him 3 blocks from here. Kane wants the girl before Blake talks." The revelation hit like artillery fire. Blake Mercer wasn't hiding in some foreign country. He was in Chicago, close enough that Kane's people had visual confirmation, close enough that the whole equation had changed from finding a ghost to containing an immediate crisis. Mac had appeared during the interrogation, and his face showed he'd reached the same tactical conclusion Cole had. "Boss, if Blake's in play, he's the key. We get Blake, we get the evidence against Kane." Doc had his medical bag out, working to stabilize the wounded attacker with the same care he'd given to Marines and insurgents alike in Ramadi, because medics treated everyone and let God sort out the rest. "This guy needs a hospital in the next 30 minutes. Cole made the call that separated operators from amateurs. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, gave the address and situation, then walked away before the dispatcher could ask questions that would take too long to answer. The police and ambulance would arrive, would find 4 attackers and evidence of a home invasion, would catalog everything for a report that would ultimately go nowhere because Kane had enough connections to make sure it didn't. But the wounded man would live, which meant Cole's conscience stayed clean, which meant he could still look at himself in the mirror and recognize the man looking back. The secure room's magnetic locks disengaged at Cole's voice command, and Emma stood in the doorway wearing tactical vest that was 2 sizes too big, her hands white-knuckled on the Glock 19 that Cole kept in the safe room for worst-case scenarios. She lowered the weapon when she saw him, and relief flooded her expression before hardening into something that looked like determination. "Is it over?" Cole shook his head and her face fell before she rallied. 4 attackers down, but there'll be more." Emma looked at the blood on his jacket. Not his blood, but she didn't know that, and something shifted in her expression. She moved closer and her hands came up to check him for wounds with surprising competence. "Are you hurt?" The concern in her voice made Cole's chest tighten, because it had been 5 years since anyone had checked him for wounds, 5 years since Sarah had waited up when he came home from deployments and counted his fingers to make sure he'd brought all of them back. He caught Emma's hands, gently stopped her search before it could become something neither of them was ready for. "I'm fine. Just other people's blood." Emma's hand stayed in his and she looked up at him with eyes that held too many questions and not enough answers. "This is because of me." "All of this?" Cole's voice stayed firm, the command tone that brooked no argument. "This is because of Kane, because of Blake, because of men who chose power over honor. You're just the excuse. If it wasn't you, it'd be someone else." Emma pulled her hands back, wrapping her arms around herself like she could contain the fear if she just held tight enough. "I've spent 2 years running, 2 years being afraid. I'm so tired of being afraid." The vulnerability in those words reminded Cole why he'd taken this job in the first place, why Father Brennan's request had hit him in places he'd thought were safely armored. Emma Hayes deserved better than the hand she'd been dealt. Deserved a chance to stop running and start living. And if Cole had to kill everyone Kane sent to prevent that, he'd do it without hesitation and sleep fine afterward. Then tomorrow we start changing that. I'll teach you to protect yourself, how to fight back, how to survive when protection fails. Emma's eyes widened slightly. You said I should stay in the safe room, follow orders. Cole allowed himself a small smile. That was before you picked up a weapon and held position while bullets were flying. You earned the right to learn. The moment stretched between them, and Cole saw Emma processing everything that had happened, everything that would come. When she spoke, her voice carried new strength. Okay, tomorrow we start, but tonight, can I just not be alone? The request was innocent, the need for human connection after trauma, but Cole felt the danger in it anyway. Getting close to principles broke professional boundaries, created complications that got people killed when emotions overrode tactics. But Emma wasn't just a principal anymore. She was a woman who'd held her ground under fire, who trusted him with her life, who reminded him that life meant more than just survival. The command center had couches that converted to bunks, and Cole gestured toward them. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Emma nodded, moved toward the nearest couch, then paused. Cole? He turned back. Thank you for protecting me, for seeing me when I was invisible. The words hit harder than they should have, and Cole's response came out rougher than intended. You were never invisible. You were just waiting for someone to look. Emma's smile was small but genuine, and she curled up on the couch, still wearing the oversized tactical vest. Cole watched her breathing even out, watched the fear drain from her expression as exhaustion claimed its due. Then he returned to the monitors, to the tactical displays, showing Chicago's night to the job of keeping watch while others slept. Mac materialized beside him with fresh coffee, and they stood in silence, watching the screens until Mac's voice broke the quiet. Boss, she's getting under your skin. Cole didn't deny it because Mac had known him too long and seen too much. She reminds me, Mac cut him off. She reminds you of Katie, I know. But she's not Katie, and you're not saving your daughter by saving her. The words were harsh but necessary, and Cole forced himself to hear them. I know that. Mac's hand landed on Cole's shoulder, the grip carrying 3 combat tours worth of brotherhood. Just make sure you do, because if you're trying to resurrect ghosts, you'll get both of you killed. Cole nodded, and Mac moved away to take his own watch position. The command center settled into the rhythm of alert readiness professionals who knew how to stay awake through the endless hours when violence might come from any direction. Cole's phone buzzed with an encrypted text from an unknown number. The message contained a photo of Father Brennan tied to a chair in what looked like a church basement, visible bruises on his face where someone had made points with fists. Below the photo text that made Cole's blood run cold. Trade. Her for him. Tomorrow noon, St. Michael's Church. Come alone, or the old man dies. Cole stared at the screen, tactical calculations running through his head faster than conscious thought. Kane had escalated from surveillance to assault to hostage-taking in less than 6 hours, which meant the situation had gone from manageable to critical. Father Brennan wouldn't survive if Cole refused the trade. But trading Emma meant Kane got everything he wanted, the witness dead, the evidence buried, the loose ends severed. The command center's computers hummed, the city's lights glittered through the windows, and Emma slept on the couch, still wearing armor she barely knew how to use. Cole looked at the photo of Father Brennan again, at the old priest who'd given last rites to half his platoon and absolution to the other half, who'd stood beside him at Sarah and Katie's funeral when everyone else had found excuses to be elsewhere. Mac appeared at his shoulder, read the screen over Cole's arm, and his face went hard. What's the play, boss? Cole's thumb hovered over the delete button, but he didn't press it. Instead, he forwarded the photo to Mac's phone and Doc's, creating a redundancy in case his phone was compromised. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute certainty that had gotten Marines through impossible situations. Get the team. Full tactical kit. Kane wants to play God in a church. He locked eyes with Mac, and the old gunnery sergeant grinned with the particular joy that came from men who'd been outgunned before and won anyway. We'll show him the devil. The team assembled in Sentinel's command center like ghosts materializing from Chicago's pre-dawn darkness. 4 a.m. carried the particular silence that preceded violence, and Cole watched his brothers filter through the security checkpoint with the economy of movement that marked professionals who'd learned to save energy for when bullets started flying. Reaper Rodriguez came first, the former Marine Scout sniper, moving with the liquid quiet despite carrying a rifle case that held the M110 he'd used to good effect in Helmand Province. Tommy Chen followed demolitions expert, whose nervous energy translated to fingers constantly tapping rhythms against his thigh, mental calculations running through blast radii and shaped charges. Doc Harrison had never left his vigil at the medical station unbroken since the assault ended. Max spread a tactical map across the conference table, satellite imagery of St. Michael's Church overlaid with approach vectors and sight lines that told the story of how quickly a house of God could become a slaughterhouse. The church's architecture favored defenders' thick stone walls, limited entry points, bell tower offering 360 coverage of the surrounding blocks. Kane had chosen well, which meant Cole needed to choose better. Gentleman's situation is hot. High-value principal enemy is Victor Kane. Yes, that Victor Kane, and he's got Father Brennan hostage. Reaper's low whistle cut the silence, and his scarred hands moved to check his rifle case with the automatic reflex that came from knowing your weapon better than your own heartbeat. Kane. Heard he went private. Didn't think we'd cross him again. Cole's jaw tightened at the word again, because Reaper had been there in Kandahar when Kane had ordered the strike that leveled a compound holding 6 Taliban fighters and 14 civilians, had smiled when Cole objected and explained that acceptable losses were the price of winning wars. Reaper had filed his own complaint, and it had disappeared into the same black hole that swallowed everything inconvenient to men with Kane's connections. He wants a trade. Emma for Father Brennan. St. Michael's Church, noon today. Doc pulled up architectural schematics on his laptop, fingers flying across keys with a precision that made him equally deadly with scalpels and code. That's a trap. Church has 3 entry points. Bell tower for sniper overwatch, basement catacombs for flanking maneuvers. Classic ambush architecture. Cole nodded because Doc's assessment matched his own tactical analysis, validated the plan forming in his head. Exactly. Which means we don't play his game. We change the battlefield. Tommy leaned forward, nervous energy focused into tactical curiosity. Where's that boss? Cole pulled up new satellite imagery, this time showing a sprawling estate north of the city, 40 acres of manicured grounds and security fencing that screamed money and secrets. Kane's home. Lake Forest compound, private security, legitimate business front. While he's waiting at the church, we hit his real fortress. Mac's eyes narrowed, reading the play. You want to raid Kane's estate during the exchange? Not raid. Infiltrate. Extract the evidence. Blake Mercer compiled bank records, client lists, everything proving Kane's operations. Emma's voice came from the doorway, and Cole turned to find her awake despite the early hours, still wearing the oversized tactical vest, like armor, she'd forgotten to remove. Her eyes held the exhaustion that came from sleeping in snatches between nightmares, but her voice stayed steady. Blake kept insurance. He talked about it constantly, documents hidden, where digital couldn't reach physical ledgers from the old school. She moved closer to the map, and Cole saw her brain engaging, despite the fear of the accountant's mind that had survived Blake's manipulation, starting to process the tactical puzzle. He was paranoid about encryption keys, offshore accounts. Said even God couldn't find his retirement fund. Cole filed that information alongside what he'd already compiled, building the operational picture. If Kane has those ledgers, they're in his estate safe, which means we need 2 teams, one at the church keeping Kane occupied, one at the estate securing evidence. The unspoken calculus hung in the air like smoke. Someone had to walk into Kane's trap knowing it was a trap, had to hold position long enough for the real mission to succeed. Cole watched his team process that reality, watched them measure the risk against the reward. Mac broke the silence. Boss, that's suicide. Kane will have 20 guns on you at the church, which is why I'm not going alone. Reaper, you're on overwatch. Bell tower across the street, keep me breathing. Reaper's answering nod carried the weight of a dozen missions where his rifle had been the difference between Marines coming home alive or in bags. Can do. Mac, you lead the estate team. Doc and Tommy provide technical support and demolitions if needed. That's the primary objective, secure those documents. Mac's face showed he understood what Cole wasn't saying, that the church operation was a diversion, that Cole was making himself bait, that if things went wrong, Father Brennan and Cole would both die while the real mission succeeded. The old gunnery sergeant's jaw worked, and Cole watched him swallow objections that wouldn't change the tactical necessity. And you're secondary. Cole met his eyes with the flat honesty that came from accepting your own mortality in Fallujah and learning to function anyway. I'm expendable. Father Brennan and Emma aren't. Clear. The silence stretched until Mac's voice came out rough. Clear, sir. Emma's hand found Cole's arm, and he felt the tremor in her fingers despite her controlled expression. This is insane. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, but I don't leave people behind. Father Brennan's in that chair because of me, because I took this job. That makes his safety my responsibility. Emma's grip tightened, and Cole saw something shift in her face the moment when civilians realized that operators meant what they said about never leaving anyone behind, that the words weren't just rhetoric, but code written in blood, and honored even when honor meant dying. Then teach me first. Before you go, show me how to survive if you don't come back. The request was practical and devastating, and Cole looked at the chronometer showing 0417, 7 hours and 43 minutes until the church exchange. Enough time to give Emma basics that might keep her alive, not enough time to make her dangerous. But dangerous wasn't the goal. Survival was. All right, but we do this fast and we do it right. He led her down to Sentinel's gym, converted warehouse space holding heavy bags and sparring mats, and the accumulated equipment of men who understood that fitness was the difference between completing the mission and becoming a casualty statistic. Emma looked small in the cavernous room, but she squared her shoulders and faced him with determination that reminded Cole uncomfortably of Katie's stubborn insistence that she could handle trauma nursing, despite her father's objections. First lesson, most people die because they're not paying attention. You scan every room, identify exits, assess threats before you need them. He walked her through the fundamentals, watching her eyes learn to track movement and catalog details. She picked it up faster than expected the accountant's brain that processed numbers translating easily to processing tactical information. After 15 minutes, she could identify cover versus concealment, could map the room's escape routes without prompting. Good. Your brain is your best weapon. Everything else is backup. The self-defense segment went harder. Cole demonstrated strikes to vulnerable targets, eyes, throat, groin, and Emma practiced on the heavy bag with increasing force as her inhibitions broke down and survival instinct took over. Her form was terrible, but terrible form that connected beat-perfect form that hesitated. You're not trying to win fights. You're creating space to run. Aim for vulnerable areas, fight dirty, forget everything movies taught you about honor. There's no honor in dying clean. Emma's strikes got harder, and Cole saw rage bleeding through the fear, 2 years of running and hiding, finding outlet in violence against canvas and padding. When she finally stopped breathing hard and hands red from impact, her eyes held new steel. Like this harder. You're not annoying him, you're buying seconds to escape. She hit again, and this time the bag swung with real force. Cole nodded approval. Better. Now firearms. The range occupied Sentinel's basement, soundproofed walls absorbing the crack of gunfire that would otherwise alert neighbors to activities best kept quiet. Cole handed Emma the Glock 19 she'd held during the assault, walked her through manual of arms, with the patience that came from training hundreds of Marines who'd arrived knowing nothing and left knowing enough to stay alive. This is a tool, not magic, not a guarantee. It's an equalizer that gives you options. Emma's first shots went wide, fear and unfamiliarity translating to jerky trigger pulls and anticipatory flinching. Cole moved behind her, adjusted her stance with hands that stayed professional despite the intimacy of close instruction. Breathe. Squeeze, don't pull. Let the recoil surprise you. Shot by shot, her grouping tightened. By the 30th round, she was hitting center mass at 7 yards. And while that wouldn't win competitions, it might buy the seconds that separated living from dying. You won't win gunfights, but you can buy time. That's enough. They moved through the training in compressed silence, Cole's tactical mind already running scenarios for the church, while his hands guided Emma through fundamentals she'd need if everything went wrong. The chronometer showed 0645 when they finally stopped, both sweating despite the basement's chill, and Emma's eyes held exhaustion that went deeper than physical exertion. Thank you for this, for treating me like I can handle it. You can. You just needed someone to show you how. The moment stretched, and Cole became acutely aware of how close they stood, how her breathing had synced with his during the training, how her eyes held something beyond gratitude. He stepped back before the moment could become something neither of them was ready for, before professional boundaries could blur into complications that got people killed. Get cleaned up, eat. We move in 4 hours. Emma nodded and headed toward the showers, and Cole returned to the command center where his team was conducting final weapons checks and mission rehearsals. Mac looked up from the satellite imagery he'd been studying, and his expression showed he'd been doing his own calculations. Boss Kane's estate security is no joke. 12 guards visible on thermals, probably more inside. We go loud, local PD responds in under 10 minutes, which is why you go quiet. Infiltrate from the lakeside, bypass perimeter sensors, extract the evidence before anyone knows you were there. Tommy pulled up building schematics that he'd obtained through methods that probably violated 6 federal statutes. Estate safe is 3rd floor east wing. Military-grade biometric locks. I can crack it, but need 15 minutes uninterrupted. 15 minutes was eternity in hostile territory, but Cole had seen Tommy work and trusted his assessment. You'll have it. Mac keeps security occupied. Doc provides overwatch from water approach. You get in that safe and get out. Reaper had his rifle disassembled on the table, cleaning each component with the meditative focus that marked snipers who understood their weapon was the only thing standing between their teammates and body bags. He didn't look up as he spoke. Boss Church Tower across from St. Michael's gives me 270-degree coverage, but there's a dead zone near the altar. You go in there, I can't help you. Then I don't go in there. I stay in your cone of fire until extraction. The plan was coming together with the precision that separated professional operations from amateur chaos. Cole checked his own gear. Sig Sauer P226 with 4 spare magazines, tactical folder, body armor, under civilian clothes, encrypted radio with bone conduction earpiece that would let him communicate without visible equipment. The loadout balanced capability with the need to appear non-threatening, at least until the shooting started. Doc approached with a first aid kit that looked more like a trauma surgeon's toolkit, and his weathered face showed concern that went beyond tactical assessment. Boss, you're walking into a kill box. If Kane decides the trade isn't worth it, then you complete the primary mission and make sure Emma stays safe. That's the win condition. Doc's jaw tightened, but he nodded because arguing with Cole's decisions had stopped working sometime around Ramadi when Cole had held a defensive position against overwhelming force and refused extraction until every civilian had been evacuated. Some men led from the rear. Cole led from the front, and his team had learned to accept that even when acceptance meant watching him walk into situations that should have killed him, but somehow didn't. Emma reappeared wearing clothes from Sentinel's emergency supplies, tactical pants, and a dark shirt that fit better than the restaurant uniform. And Cole saw her moving differently now. Eyes scanning approaches, body angled to maintain sightlines, the training already translating into automatic behavior. She caught him watching and managed a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Do I look like someone who can protect herself? You look like someone who's learning. That's more dangerous than most people realize. Mac's phone buzzed with an alert, and his face went hard as he read the screen. Boss Chicago PD just put out a bolo. Blake Mercer spotted in River North 2 hours ago. He's still in the city. The revelation hit like incoming fire, reshaping the entire tactical picture. Blake wasn't hiding overseas or dead in a ditch. He was in Chicago, close enough to be a factor, close enough that Kane's urgency suddenly made terrible sense. If Blake surfaced and started talking to federal investigators, Kane's entire network collapsed. Emma was the key to finding Blake, which meant Emma alive was Kane's worst nightmare. Cole's phone rang, the encrypted line that only a handful of people possessed. He answered, already knowing who it would be. Maddox. The voice belonged to someone he'd served with in Afghanistan, someone who'd gone on to wear stars while Cole had gone private. General Sarah Hastings spoke with the clipped precision that came from commanding thousands and accepting that every order might send some of them home in flag-draped boxes. Cole, I hear you're having difficulties with Victor Kane. News travels fast. Hastings' laugh held no humor. When Kane activates international assets for domestic operations, people notice. I'm calling because I have an interest in seeing him stopped. Cole processed that statement alongside everything he knew about Hastings' current position at the Pentagon, and the implications made his pulse spike. What kind of interest? The kind that involves national security. Kane's not just running security consulting, he's funding regime changes. 3 South American countries, 2 African nations. He's building private armies and selling them to the highest bidders. The scope of Kane's operations suddenly crystallized, and Cole understood why a lieutenant colonel's complaint had disappeared, because Kane had been untouchable, even then, protected by people who benefited from his services or feared his reprisals. You have proof, not yet. But if what you told me about Blake Mercer's records is accurate, those ledgers would give us everything we need. Bank accounts, client list, payment schedules. Enough to bring Kane down and roll up his entire network. Cole's tactical brain was already recalculating, already seeing how this changed the equation from personal vendetta to strategic necessity. I'm sending you encrypted files from what we recovered so far. Enough to show this is real. Doc had been monitoring the conversation and his fingers flew across his keyboard, uploading samples of the financial data they'd pulled from Kane's shell corporations. 30 seconds later, Hastings' sharp intake of breath told Cole she'd seen enough. Jesus Christ, this is bigger than I thought. Cole, I'm mobilizing resources. DoD, State Department, FBI, clean teams. But I need those original ledgers. My team's extracting them today. But General Kane has hostages. Father Brennan, if we move too fast, then we move precisely. I'm sending an extraction team to your location, ETA 3 hours. You hold position, keep your principal safe, and let proper authorities handle Kane. Cole thought about Father Brennan tied to a chair about Kane's deadline that wouldn't wait for bureaucratic timelines. With respect, General Kane's deadline is noon. Your team won't arrive in time. Hastings' silence carried the weight of command decisions where every option cost lives and the only question was which lives cost less. Then you do what you do best, Marine. You hold the line until we get there. And Cole, don't die. I need you to testify when this goes to trial. The line went dead and Cole looked at his team, watching him with expressions that showed they had heard enough to understand the stakes had just escalated beyond personal protection into geopolitical chess. Max spoke what they were all thinking. Boss, if Kane's running coups, he's got resources we can't match. Mercenaries, weapons, government connections. This isn't a firefight, it's a war. Then we fight it like Marines, outnumbered, outgunned, and too stupid to quit. Reaper's laugh was sharp and humorless. Aura, the chronometer showed 10:47, and Cole ran final checks on his gear while Mac's team prepared for the estate infiltration. Emma stood near the windows watching Chicago's skyline, and Cole moved to her side because she deserved to know what was happening, deserved to understand that the situation had escalated beyond anything they'd anticipated. Blake's still in the city, which means Kane's deadline isn't just about Father Brennan. It's about containing all his loose ends before federal authorities arrive. Emma's reflection in the window showed her processing that information, connecting dots that revealed how thoroughly Blake had manipulated her and how completely Kane wanted her erased. I'm the connection between Blake and Kane. If I die, the trail goes cold. Cole nodded because sugar-coating reality didn't help anyone survive it, which is why you stay here, guarded, until this ends. Emma turned to face him, and her eyes held the determination he'd seen during training. And if you don't come back, if Kane kills you and Father Brennan, then Mac completes the mission and General Hastings' team arrives to clean up the mess. Either way, Kane loses. The statement was tactically sound and emotionally devastating, and Emma's face showed she understood Cole was preparing for the possibility that he wouldn't survive the next 2 hours. Her hand came up to his chest, resting over the concealed body armor, and Cole felt a tremor in her fingers despite her controlled expression. Come back. That's an order. Her attempt at command voice would have been amusing in different circumstances, but right now it landed with unexpected weight because somewhere between the restaurant and this moment, Emma Hayes had stopped being just a principal and started being someone whose opinion mattered, whose fear for his safety created pressure in his chest that had nothing to do with tactical concerns. I'll do my best. The words were inadequate, but Emma seemed to accept them because she nodded once and stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself before the moment could become something that complicated everything. Mac appeared with final mission briefs and the team's synchronized watches to ensure coordination across the split operation. We go in 15 minutes. Reaper deploys to Overwatch position at 11:45. Cole enters church at noon exactly. Mac's team hits the estate simultaneously. Questions. Tommy raised a hand, nervous energy channeling into tactical curiosity. What happens if Kane doesn't bring Father Brennan? If this whole thing is a setup to draw you out, then I adapt. But Kane's smart enough to know I won't negotiate without proof of life. He'll bring the father because he needs me to believe the trade is real. The team moved with practiced efficiency, each man checking his brother's gear, ensuring weapons were loaded and safeties engaged until needed. Cole watched them work and felt the familiar weight of command, the knowledge that his decisions would determine who lived and who died, that mistakes measured in seconds could echo through decades. But he'd made peace with that burden in Fallujah when he'd called in artillery danger close to his own position and watched it save his Marines at the cost of his own hearing and sanity. This was just another mission, just another calculation of acceptable losses. Emma appeared at his elbow as the team filed toward the garage, and she pressed something into his hand, a rosary that Cole recognized as Father Brennan's, the beads worn smooth from decades of prayer in foxholes and hospital rooms, and moments when faith was the only weapon that worked. He left this at the shelter, said you might need it someday. Cole's throat tightened because Brennan had known this moment was coming, had prepared for it with the quiet certainty that came from men who'd seen enough death to recognize its approach. He closed his fingers around the rosary, feeling the weight of expectation and faith and brotherhood that came with carrying another man's prayers into battle. Thank you. The words were inadequate, but Emma nodded like she understood everything he couldn't say. Then Mac was calling from the garage, and Cole moved because the mission clock was running and sentiment didn't stop bullets or save hostages. The drive to St. Michael's took 20 minutes through Chicago traffic that flowed around them with the indifferent chaos of a city that didn't know war was coming to its streets. Reaper split off 3 blocks out, moving to his overwatch position with the invisible efficiency that made snipers ghosts until their rifles spoke. Mac's team headed north toward Lake Forest, and Cole continued alone toward the church that dominated its block with Gothic stonework and stained glass that had witnessed 100 years of prayers and would soon witness something far removed from divine grace. Cole parked 2 blocks away, walked the approach on foot, scanning for Kane's security. The church's architecture was exactly as Doc had described: 3 entry points with the main doors facing East Bell Tower, offering commanding height basement access through side stairs that could be blocked with 2 men. Kane had chosen his battlefield well, but every battlefield had weaknesses if you looked hard enough. Reaper's voice came through the bone conduction earpiece, barely audible whisper that carried across encrypted channels. I'm in position. Tower's empty, but there's fresh boot prints. Someone was here and left, which meant Kane had considered putting his own sniper in Overwatch, but decided against it, probably because he wanted Cole alive long enough to confirm Emma's location before the killing started. That gave Cole a narrow window to work with, the time between entering the church and Kane deciding he had enough information to act. I'm going in. Keep me alive. Always do, boss. The church doors opened with medieval weight, heavy wood and iron that groaned like the damned. Interior darkness swallowed Cole as his eyes adjusted from October sunlight to candlelit gloom, and he cataloged threats with automatic precision. 14 pews offering cover altar, raised 3 steps providing tactical advantage, confessional booths that could hide shooters, sacristy door that probably led to the basement where Father Brennan waited. Victor Kane emerged from shadows near the altar, and Cole felt 15 years collapse into this moment. All the anger and betrayal and rage that came from watching a brother-in-arms choose profit over principle, power over honor. Kane wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and his smile held the easy confidence of men who believe themselves untouchable. Cole, right on time. You always were punctual. Where's Father Brennan? Kane gestured, and 2 men brought the priest from the sacristy. Brennan looked worse than his photo had suggested, bruises darkening to purple across his weathered face, left eye swollen, nearly shut, dried blood at the corner of his mouth from where someone had made points with fists. But his eyes, when they met Cole's, held steady determination, and the slight shake of his head warned against heroic stupidity. Your priest, alive as promised. Now where's the girl? Cole's voice stayed level despite the fury building in his chest. Safe. Far from here, where you'll never find her. Kane's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. I meant what I said on the phone. Walk away. $5 million. The girl disappears painlessly, and you live rich. Cole thought about Emma in Sentinel's command center, thought about her learning to fight back after 2 years of running, thought about Katie's face when she told him that nursing meant helping people even when helping was hard. Thought about every reason he'd taken this job and every reason he'd keep it. Not happening. Kane's smile turned predatory. Why, she's nobody to you. Another broken civilian in a city full of them. She's an innocent. That makes her everything. Kane laughed genuine amusement that made Cole's hand drift toward his concealed weapon. Still the Boy Scout. We killed innocents in Fallujah and Kabul. Orders were orders, and you followed them. Those were enemy combatants in active war zones. This is murder for profit. There's a difference. Kane's expression hardened. Only to men who can't see the bigger picture. Did you ever wonder why I recruited Blake Mercer? Why I needed his Ponzi scheme money laundering? Kane's eyes glittered with something that looked like pride. Bigger, I'm funding coups. 3 South American countries, 2 African nations. Blake's stolen millions were seed money for regime changes that will reshape global power structures. The admission landed like physical impact, confirming what General Hastings had suspected and making the stakes crystal clear. Kane wasn't just a criminal. He was a terrorist operating on international scale, and Emma Hayes was the witness who could connect every thread. You're insane. I'm inevitable. And Emma Hayes can connect Blake to me. That connection destroys everything I've built. So she dies. Father Brennan dies. And you, old friend, you die too. Kane pulled a pistol with casual ease, and the church doors slammed open as 20 armed men flooded through every entrance. Cole found himself surrounded, and Kane's smile showed he'd been waiting for this moment since the phone call ended. Did you really think I'd come alone? Cole's hand moved toward his Sig Sauer, calculating angles and cover, and the probability that he could draw and fire before 20 weapons cut him down. The math was bad, but Reaper's voice in his earpiece shifted the equation. Boss, I've been working. 8 tangos neutralized around the perimeter. Your 6 is clear. Cole's fingers snapped the signal he and Reaper had used in a dozen operations. Nothing happened from Kane's perspective, but Cole knew that across the street, Reaper's rifle was tracking targets with the patient precision that made him legendary. Did you? Kane's eyes narrowed, reading subtext, and Cole saw the moment comprehension dawn. Kane's voice came out sharp with command authority. Light them up, but Cole was already moving, drawing his Sig Sauer as he dove behind the nearest pew. The church lights shattered under Reaper's suppressed fire, plunging the interior into darkness, broken only by muzzle flashes and screaming. Cole's night vision goggles descended from his collar. He'd worn them hidden, counting on this exact scenario, and suddenly he owned the battlefield. Kane's men fired blind panic, overriding training as they hosed down the church interior with automatic weapons that chewed wood and stone and stained glass. Cole moved between pews like a ghost-controlled pairs, dropping targets with the mechanical precision that came from muscle memory and 10,000 hours of close-quarters battle. 2 rounds next target, 2 rounds next target. The rhythm became meditation. Reaper's voice stayed calm in his ear. Kane's moving toward the basement. Brennan's guards are down. Cole fought toward the sacristy, bullets whining past close enough to feel the displacement. A shooter rose from behind the altar, and Cole's double tap dropped him before the muzzle could track. 3 more to the left, and Cole went prone as their fire stitched the air where his chest had been. Reaper's rifle coughed once, twice, 3 times, and the shooters collapsed. The sacristy door led to stairs descending into medieval darkness, and Cole cleared them with controlled aggression weapon up and scanning. Father Brennan sat where Kane's men had left him, bonds cut, and the old priest's eyes showed he'd been waiting for rescue with the patience that came from trusting your brothers to come. Can you walk? Brennan's voice was hoarse but steady. Better than I can run. Get us out of here. Cole hauled the priest up the stairs as gunfire continued above Kane's remaining men, realizing too late that they'd brought superior numbers to a fight where superior skill mattered more. The church's side exit opened onto the alley where Cole had positioned his truck, and he keyed his radio as they stumbled into daylight. Reaper, I'm clear. Exfil now. Already moving, boss. Police are 3 minutes out. Cole got Father Brennan into the truck as sirens wailed in the distance. Chicago PD, responding to reports of automatic weapons fire in a residential neighborhood. He pulled away seconds before the first patrol car arrived, and his mirrors showed tactical officers deploying toward a church that would be empty except for bodies and brass. Father Brennan touched his arm, and Cole saw blood on the priest's knuckles from where he'd fought back before they'd beaten him into submission. Thank you, my boy. I knew you'd come. Always. I don't leave people behind. The words came out rough with emotion Cole couldn't quite contain, and Brennan's hand squeezed his arm with surprising strength. Katie would be proud. Sarah too. Cole's throat tightened and he focused on driving because the alternative was feeling things he couldn't afford to feel with the mission still incomplete. His phone buzzed with an encrypted text from Mac. "We're in. Estate security is heavier than expected, going loud." The message carried implications that made Cole's chest constrict, because going loud meant the quiet infiltration had failed me and Mac's team was fighting their way through Kane's private fortress, while Cole had been occupied at the church. The whole operation had been designed to split Kane's forces, but if the estate team was compromised, Mac's voice came through the radio, stress making his usually calm tone sharp. "Boss, we're in the estate, but security's responding faster than expected. Tommy needs more time with the safe." "How much more?" 10 minutes. "Maybe 15. Cole checked his watch and calculated response times from local police, factored in the likelihood that Kane had cops on his payroll who would delay response or provide early warning. "You have 12 minutes. After that, extraction becomes impossible." "Roger." Doc's holding the water approach, but we're taking fire from the main house. The tactical picture was deteriorating, and Cole forced his brain to stay analytical. Despite the fear that came from having brothers in contact while he was too far away to help, he'd put them in this situation. He'd split the team. If they died, it was on him. Reaper appeared in the passenger seat as Cole swung by the extraction point, the sniper materializing like smoke and carrying his rifle case with the reverent care that men reserve for tools that kept them alive. His face was streaked with sweat despite the October chill, and his hands shook slightly from adrenaline come-down. "Hell of a party, boss. Count as 11 confirmed, maybe more in the chaos. Good shooting." "Father Brennan, this is Reaper Rodriguez, best sniper I've ever worked with." Brennan managed a pained smile. "Thank you for keeping my foolish friend alive." "Just doing my job, Father." Mac's voice crackled again, and this time Cole heard sustained gunfire in the background. "Boss, we got the ledgers. Tommy cracked the safe, but estate security has us pinned down in the study. Need extraction now." Cole's mind raced through options, calculating distances and response times and the probability that he could reach Lake Forest before Mac's team was overrun. The math was bad, but leaving them wasn't an option. "Hold position. I'm coming to you." Reaper was already checking his rifle, chambering around with mechanical precision. "How far? 20 minutes if traffic's clear." "Could be 30. Reaper's jaw set with grim determination. "Then we better drive fast." Cole pushed the truck to its limits, weaving through Chicago traffic with the aggressive urgency that came from brothers in contact. Father Brennan held the dashboard with white-knuckled grip, and Reaper maintained his rifle despite the vehicle's movement, ready to engage the second they arrived. Mac's updates came in staccato bursts between gunfire. "We're fighting to the garage. Doc's providing cover. Tommy's got the documents. 3 guards down. More coming from the main house. We're at the vehicles, but they're all disabled. Someone sabotaged our extraction." The last message made Cole's blood freeze, because sabotage meant inside knowledge, meant someone had known the plan before Mac's team arrived. "Mac, you've got a leak. Someone knew you were coming." "Copy that." The transmission cut to static and gunfire, and then a woman's voice came through in accented English that marked her as Eastern European, probably Russian. "Your men fought well, Colonel Maddox, but they forgot that Kane doesn't leave anything to chance." Cole's hands tightened on the wheel and Reaper's expression went deadly. "Who is this Elena Rostova?" "Kane's insurance policy. And I'm holding detonators that will level this garage with your precious Marines inside unless they surrender the documents." "You have 30 seconds. The tactical calculus shifted instantly. Cole had seconds to decide let Max surrender the evidence and maybe survive, or call Elena's bluff and risk losing everything, including his team. He thought about the ledgers about General Hastings waiting for proof that could stop Kane's international operations. Thought about Emma in Sentinel's command center trusting him to succeed. Mac's voice came through, weak but determined. "Boss, don't negotiate. We can handle." The sound of a safety clicking off cut him short, and Elena's laugh was cold. 20 seconds, Colonel. Choose wisely." Reaper leaned close, voice barely audible. "She's bluffing. Explosives in a garage would kill her too. Maybe. Or maybe she's committed enough to take that trade." 10 seconds. Cole made the decision that separated leaders from followers that defined whether you protected the mission or protected the men. Mac gave her the documents. The silence carried disappointment and relief in equal measure, and Cole heard the rustle of papers being passed over. Elena's satisfied voice confirmed receipt. Smart choice. Your men may leave. But know this, Colonel Kane will find other evidence. Other witnesses. This changes nothing. The line went dead and Mac's breathing came through ragged with exhaustion and frustration. Boss, I'm sorry. She had us cold. You're alive. That's what matters. Exfil to Rally Point Bravo. Copy. We're moving. Cole's fist hit the steering wheel hard enough to make Reaper wince, and Father Brennan's hand found his shoulder with the gentle pressure that had steadied thousands of Marines through moments when rage threatened to override discipline. You made the right choice, son. Men are worth more than evidence. The words were meant to comfort, but they landed hollow because Cole had gambled everything on securing those ledgers, had split his team and risked Father Brennan's life, and now Kane still had his insurance while General Hastings waited for proof that wouldn't come. Sentinel HQ appeared ahead, and Cole pulled into the garage with enough force to make the tires squeal. Emma met them at the entrance, and her relief at seeing Cole and Father Brennan alive warred with concern as she read their expressions. What happened? We lost the evidence. Kane's people were waiting. Emma's face fell, but before she could respond, Doc's voice came through the radio with news that made Cole's blood run cold. Boss, Chicago PD just raided Sentinel. They're arresting everyone. We can't come back there. Cole's brain processed implications faster than conscious thought. The church shooting would have generated APBs. Kane had cops on payroll who could connect Cole to the scene. Someone had made the call to shut down Sentinel and scatter his team before they could regroup. All personnel scattered to safe houses. Do not return to base. We're compromised. Emma's eyes widened. What does that mean? It means we run. Now. Cole grabbed essential gear weapons, ammunition, encrypted laptop with backup files, while Reaper helped Father Brennan move despite his injuries. Emma stood frozen until Cole's command voice cut through her shock. Emma, move. We have maybe 5 minutes before CPD arrives. She snapped to action, grabbing the go bag Cole had prepared for exactly this scenario. They piled into the truck as sirens wailed in the distance, and Cole pulled out through the back exit that led to service alleys most cops didn't know existed. Where are we going? The safe house in Oak Park. It's clean off the books, no connection to Sentinel. The drive took 40 minutes through surface, streets, and back roads. Cole constantly checking mirrors for pursuit, while Reaper maintained watch with the paranoid vigilance that kept snipers alive. Father Brennan had gone pale from pain and blood loss, and Emma worked to keep him conscious with the focused intensity that came from having a task that kept panic at bay. The safe house was an anonymous two-story in a neighborhood where people minded their business, purchased under a shell corporation that couldn't be traced to Cole or Sentinel. Interior was spartanly furnished, but functional beds, kitchen, reinforced doors, and bulletproof windows. Cole got Father Brennan settled, while Reaper set up defensive positions, and Emma tried to process how completely their situation had deteriorated. We lost. Kane won. Her voice held defeat that made something in Cole's chest clench because he'd spent the entire operation trying to prevent exactly this. Emma giving up, surrendering to the weight of forces aligned against her. We're alive. That means we can still fight. Emma's laugh was bitter. With what? No evidence, no team police hunting us. Kane has everything. Not everything. The voice came from the doorway, and Max stood there holding a manila envelope that looked battered from the fight. His face was bruised and his jacket torn, but his eyes held grim satisfaction. Elena took the ledgers, but she didn't check Tommy's pockets. Tommy appeared behind him, nervous energy channeling into a broad grin as he held up USB drives that gleamed in the safe house lighting. Blake's digital insurance. Found them in the safe behind the ledgers. Uploaded copies before the shooting started. Cole felt hope surge for the first time since the church, and Emma's expression transformed from defeat to desperate possibility. That's everything. Bank accounts, client list, payment schedules. Everything Kane tried to hide. Doc's laptop was already booting up, fingers flying across keys as he accessed the encrypted files. What appeared on screen made his breath catch. Boss, this is bigger than coups. Kane's funding terrorist cells, arming insurgents, selling weapons to sanctioned nations. This is treason on international scale. Cole pulled out his encrypted phone and dialed General Hastings, and when she answered, her voice carried the tension that came from waiting for news that might never come. Tell me you have something. Digital files. Everything Blake Mercer compiled. Proof of Kane's entire operation. Hastings' sharp intake of breath preceded rapid-fire questions. Can you authenticate and then verify? They haven't been altered. Emma was already examining the files with the accountant's eye that had survived Blake's manipulation. These are real. Blake's handwriting on the scanned documents, his encryption signatures on the digital files. This is his insurance policy. Hastings' voice carried new authority. Send me everything. I'm mobilizing now. Federal arrest warrants, international cooperation, the whole apparatus. Cole, where are you? Safe house in Oak Park. But CPD has warrants for my team. Then stay there. Don't move, don't engage. Let the system work. Cole thought about trusting systems that had failed to hold Kane accountable for 15 years, about waiting while Kane's people hunted Emma and his team. The alternative was continuing the fight, but continuation meant going up against resources they couldn't match. How long until your people arrive? 3 hours, maybe 4. Can you hold that long? Cole looked at his team. Reaper checking weapons, Mac treating his injuries, Doc uploading files, Father Brennan resting under Emma's care. Looked at the safe house that would become a fortress if Kane found them before federal authorities arrived. We'll hold. We always do. The line went dead and Cole gathered his team for final defensive preparations. The safe house had good bones, reinforced entry points, clear fields of fire supplies for extended siege. But 4 hours against Kane's resources meant they needed every advantage. Reaper took the second floor, setting up his rifle to cover the street approaches. Mac and Tommy rigged improvised explosives at entry points, nothing lethal but enough to channel attackers into kill zones. Doc prepared the medical station because he'd learned in Ramadi that casualties were inevitable, and preparation was the difference between saving lives and watching brothers die. Emma stood watching from the kitchen window, and Cole moved to her side because she'd earned honest assessments instead of comfortable lies. This is the part where you tell me everything's going to be fine. Her voice held irony that made Cole's lips quirk despite the situation. Everything's going to be chaotic and violent, but if we hold for 4 hours, federal authorities arrive and Kane loses. Emma turned to face him and her eyes held questions she'd been carrying since the restaurant. Why are you doing this? Really, it's not just Father Brennan or your daughter. There's something else. Cole considered deflecting, maintaining professional distance. But Emma had fought beside him, had trained and adapted, and refused to break despite everything Kane had thrown at them. She deserved truth. Because I'm tired of watching good people get destroyed by evil ones. Because for 25 years I followed orders that sometimes meant protecting bad people from good ones. Because maybe if I save you, it balances some ledger that probably doesn't exist, but I need to believe in anyway. The honesty landed between them like confession, and Emma's hand found his with surprising certainty. You're a good man, Cole Maddox. Better than you think. The moment stretched and Cole became aware of how close they stood, how her fingers had laced with his, how her eyes held something beyond gratitude. He should step back, should maintain professional boundaries, should remember that principals and operators didn't cross lines that led to complications. But Emma was already moving closer, and Cole found his discipline failing as her other hand came up to his face. The kiss was tentative and fierce in equal measure, Emma rising on her toes to close the distance, while Cole's free hand found her waist on instinct. It lasted 3 seconds before Mac's voice shattered the moment. Boss, we've got vehicles approaching. Multiple SUVs, armed personnel. Kane found us. Cole broke away from Emma with effort that felt physical, and his brain shifted from whatever had been happening to tactical necessity. He moved to the window and counted vehicles, 6 SUVs, disgorging armed men who moved with military precision. Reaper's count came through calm and deadly, 24 tangos visible. More in the vehicles. We're outnumbered 6-1. Cole's mind ran the math and found no good options, but surrender wasn't on the list. Then we make them pay for every inch. Defensive positions. Weapons free. Emma grabbed his arm as he moved toward the stairs. Cole, there's too many. We should surrender, wait for the authorities, and let Kane execute us before they arrive. We fight. His voice came out harder than intended, and Emma's face showed hurt before determination reasserted itself. She released his arm and moved to where Doc had prepared the medical station. Then I helped Doc. I won't hide while you die for me. Cole wanted to argue, but Mac was calling targets, and Reaper's rifle was already working the distinctive crack of precision fire that meant the battle had started whether Cole was ready or not. Reaper's rifle spoke first, the controlled rhythm of a professional who understood that ammunition was finite and every round needed to count. From his second-floor vantage point, he picked targets with surgical precision, squad leaders first, then shooters moving toward flanking positions, then anyone carrying communications gear. 6 shots, 6 bodies, and Kane's assault force learned that approaching the safe house meant dying in the street. Cole watched through reinforced windows as the attackers adapted, using vehicles for cover and suppressive fire to pin down Reaper's position. They moved like professionals, and Cole recognized the tactical patterns from his own training, former military, probably Spetsnaz or Delta washouts, who'd gone private for better pay and fewer rules. Kane had brought serious capability, which meant the 4-hour timeline had just shortened dramatically. Mac's voice came through calm despite the chaos erupting outside. "Boss, they're setting up for coordinated assault. 2 teams flanking east and west, main force holding center. Classic 3-prong push." Cole ran the defensive calculus and found no comfort in the numbers. 5 operators against 20-plus attackers meant they'd bleed the enemy, but eventually be overwhelmed. Unless federal authorities arrived early or Kane made mistakes, this ended one way. "Tommy, how long until those charges are ready?" Demolitions experts' hands moved with practiced speed despite the stress, wiring pressure triggers to improvised explosives that would turn entry points into kill zones. 3 minutes, maybe less if they give me motivation. A burst of automatic fire stitched the safe house exterior, bullets punching through drywall in clouds of white dust. Emma flinched but held position beside Doc, and Cole saw her hands already preparing medical supplies with the focus that came from having a job that kept panic manageable. Reaper's count came through methodical and grim. Tango down, that's 7 total, but they're getting smarter using smoke for concealment. The street filled with gray haze as attackers deployed smoke grenades, obscuring sightlines and negating Reaper's range advantage. Cole swore because smoke meant close-quarters fighting was coming, meant the battle would move from calculated violence to chaos where numbers mattered more than skill. "All stations prepare for breach. They'll hit us in the next 60 seconds. Father Brennan sat propped against the kitchen wall, rosary moving through his fingers with the automatic rhythm of decades, and his lips shaped prayers that Cole couldn't hear but recognized from too many firefights where faith was the only weapon that never ran dry. The old priest caught Cole's eye and nodded once, blessing and benediction wrapped in a single gesture. The first explosion came from the east wall where Tommy's charges had been waiting. The blast threw attackers backward in a cloud of brick dust, in flame screams cutting through the gunfire as men learned that breaching a fortified position meant paying in blood and bone. Mac's shotgun roared from that sector-controlled blast that ended threats before they could recover from the explosion's shock. West wall went next, another explosion that rattled windows and deafened everyone inside. But Kane's people had pulled back just enough that the blast wounded instead of killed. They poured through the breach before the smoke cleared, and suddenly the fight was inside the safe house. Cole met them in the hallway with controlled violence that came from muscle memory and 10,000 hours of close-quarters battle. Double tap to the first shooter transition to the second control pair that dropped him mid-stride. Third target was faster, got a burst off that chewed plaster near Cole's head before Cole's return fire punched through body armor and ended the threat. Reaper abandoned his rifle for the compact MP5 he'd kept for exactly this scenario, the weapon better suited for hallways and rooms where engagement distances measured in feet instead of yards. His suppressed fire was almost gentle compared to the cacophony of automatic weapons, but gentle didn't mean ineffective. 3 attackers went down before they realized death had come from above. Doc's position in the kitchen became medical station, and fighting position combined his sidearms steady as he fired over Emma's head to drop a shooter trying to flank through the dining room. Emma didn't scream or freeze. She grabbed the fallen attacker's rifle with hands that shook, but didn't hesitate, checking the weapon with movements Cole had taught her 72 hours ago. Safety off, magazine seated, ready to fire. Her voice carried determination that made something in Cole's chest clench with pride and terror, because she shouldn't be here, shouldn't be fighting for her life against professional killers, should be safe somewhere far from the violence that defined his world. Stay down and only shoot if they get past me. Emma's answering look suggested she understood the odds of that happening weren't good. The fight compressed into close-range chaos where training mattered less than aggression and willingness to push forward when survival instincts screamed retreat. Cole cleared rooms with Mac, their movements synchronized from years of operating together, one high, one low, overlapping fields of fire that turned hallways into death traps. Bodies accumulated, some moving and groaning, others still as the grave in the safe house filled with smoke and copper, and the particular smell that came from violence inflicted at close range. Tommy's voice crackled through static-filled radio. "Boss, they're pulling back. Count is 14 down, maybe 6 still mobile." The attackers retreated to their vehicles with the discipline that marked professionals who understood when assault had failed and consolidation was survival. Cole watched them regroup from behind cover, counting heads and measuring capabilities. Kane had thrown overwhelming force and lost half his assault element, but the remaining shooters still outnumbered Cole's team and held superior position in the street. Reaper appeared at Cole's shoulder, face streaked with sweat and powder residue, eyes carrying the particular flatness that came from killing at close range. "We can't hold another push like that. Ammunition's at 40% and Tommy's out of explosives." Cole checked his watch and felt his gut tighten. 90 minutes since General Hastings had promised federal intervention, which meant 2.5 hours remained before cavalry arrived. 2.5 hours was eternity when facing determined enemies with resources to burn. Then we don't wait for them to come to us. We take the fight to them. Mac's expression showed he'd heard worse ideas, but not many. "Boss, that's suicide. They've got cover numbers and automatic weapons, which they won't expect us to use against them. They think we're pinned down waiting for relief. We hit them now while they're regrouping." The tactical logic was sound, even if the survival probability wasn't, and Cole watched his team process the plan with the grim acceptance that came from following leaders who'd kept them alive through situations that should have killed everyone involved. Reaper moved first, transitioning back to his rifle and finding position that gave angles on the street. His voice came through, steady despite the stress. "Give me 30 seconds to get set. Then you move and I'll cover." Cole counted down and burst through the front door with Mac at his shoulder, both moving with the aggressive speed that turned defenders into attackers. Reaper's rifle spoke behind them, controlled shots that dropped sentries before they could sound alarm. Mac's shotgun boomed, and the nearest vehicle's windshield exploded in safety glass and blood. The enemy had been expecting siege warfare, and Cole's counterattack caught them flat-footed and exposed. 3 men went down before they could raise weapons, and the survivors scattered to cover. That left them vulnerable to Reaper's elevated position. It was textbook ambush execution, violence of action, overwhelming superior numbers through surprise and aggression. But textbook worked both ways, and Cole heard the diesel rumble of reinforcements before he saw them. 3 more SUVs rounded the corner with fresh shooters, and suddenly the number shifted back to overwhelming. Mac grabbed Cole's vest and hauled him toward the safe house as automatic fire chewed pavement where they'd been standing. Inside. Now they made it through the door as bullets hammered the reinforced frame, and Tommy was already rigging the last of his improvised charges with hands that moved too fast for precision. Doc had taken a round through his left arm, blood soaking his sleeve, but his face showing the calm that came from treating wounds worse than anything he'd personally suffered. Emma worked on him with surprising competence, pressure dressing, and field-expedient tourniquet that would hold until proper medical care arrived. Her hands were steady despite the fear in her eyes, and she met Cole's gaze with determination that reminded him why he'd taken this job. "We need extraction." Now, Cole's encrypted phone showed no signal, jammed by equipment Kane's people had deployed. Reaper tried his radio and got static. They were cut off, outnumbered, and running low on everything that kept operators alive in hostile situations. Father Brennan's voice cut through the tactical discussion with surprising strength. "My boy, there's another way. The church has tunnels, Prohibition-era smuggling routes that connect to buildings 3 blocks over. Access is through the basement." Cole's brain seized on that information like salvation. "This house has a basement?" Brennan nodded toward a door Cole had assumed was a closet. "Built in the 20s. Tunnel exits at the old brewery on Harrison Street. I used it myself when I was younger and less wise." The revelation changed everything, turned desperate, last stand into tactical withdrawal with survival probability that didn't approach 0. Cole moved to the door and found stairs descending into darkness that smelled like mold and forgotten history. Mac Reaper Doc. We're X-filing through the tunnels. Tommy Rig charges to blow the house after we're clear. Kill anyone still inside in slow pursuit. Tommy's grin was sharp despite the stress. With pleasure, boss. They moved in tactical column with Reaper on point, his weapon-mounted light cutting through darkness that felt older than the neighborhood above. The tunnel was brick and stone, barely wide enough for single file, and water dripped from ceiling that probably violated every structural code written since its construction. But it led away from Kane's forces, and away meant living another hour. Emma helped Father Brennan navigate the uneven floor, and Cole brought up the rear scanning for pursuit that hopefully wouldn't come. The tunnel stretched 200 yards that felt like miles, every step taking them farther from the trap Kane had prepared. The explosion came muffled through earth and brick, Tommy's charges detonating with force that rattled the tunnel and brought dust cascading from ancient mortar. Reaper's voice came through tense. Boss, tunnel's holding, but we need to move before they realize we're not in the house anymore. The brewery basement was exactly as Father Brennan described, abandoned industrial space filled with rusted equipment and broken bottles, stairs leading up to street level that probably violated every safety regulation. Cole emerged into afternoon sunlight that felt alien after the tunnel's darkness, and his eyes scanned for threats in the commercial district that had no idea violence had just passed beneath its streets. Mac's phone caught signal first, and General Hastings' voice came through sharp with concern. Cole sitrep. We heard explosions, extracted through smuggling tunnels. Current position is Harrison Street Commercial District. Kane's forces are 3 blocks east. Hastings' relief was audible. Federal response is en route ETA 40 minutes. Chicago PD is being briefed to stand down on warrants against your team. Can you hold that long? We can disappear. Chicago's a big city when you know the back alleys. Negative. I need you visible so my people can secure you. Blake Mercer just contacted FBI field office, offering to trade testimony for protective custody. He's our witness, but only if we can keep him and you alive long enough to testify. The revelation hit like physical impact. Blake Mercer was surfacing, was ready to talk, which meant Emma's nightmare might actually end with justice instead of just survival. But it also meant Kane would be throwing everything at eliminating witnesses before federal authorities could secure them. Where's Blake now? FBI has him at the Dirksen Federal Building downtown. Protective custody, maximum security. But Kane has to know by now. Then Kane's going there. He'll hit the building to get Blake before testimony happens. Hastings' silence carried the weight of command decisions where every option cost something, and the question was always which costs were acceptable. Federal building security can hold until my team arrives. Your job is staying alive until then. Find cover, maintain position, and wait for extraction. Cole looked at his team, Doc bleeding, but functional. Father Brennan struggling, but upright. Reaper and Mac running on adrenaline and determination. Tommy checking his remaining explosives with the focus that came from knowing the fight wasn't finished. Looked at Emma, watching him with eyes that held questions about what came next. General, with respect, Kane's not hitting the federal building. He's hunting us. Because we're the ones who can authenticate Blake's testimony, who can confirm the digital evidence is real. Hastings processed that tactical reality faster than most flag officers. Then I'm sending FBI to your position. Hostage rescue team, full tactical. They'll secure you until my people arrive. Cole gave their coordinates and ended the call, then gathered his team for the tactical discussion that would determine whether they survived the next 30 minutes. Kane knows we escaped. He'll be searching this area systematically, and we're low on ammunition and down a safe house. We need cover until federal response arrives. Max scanned the commercial district with a professional assessment that came from urban combat experience. We're exposed here. Too many sight lines, too little cover. We need to get inside somewhere defensible. Reaper pointed to a building 3 blocks north, concrete and steel, that looked like it could withstand serious assault. That parking garage. Multiple levels controlled access, clear fields of fire from upper decks. The plan was solid enough given limited options, and Cole nodded agreement. They moved through back streets with the tactical discipline that made civilian eyes slide past just another group navigating Chicago's afternoon without drawing attention. The parking garage was public access, and Cole's team dispersed through levels with practiced efficiency. Reaper took the roof with his rifle, establishing overwatch that commanded approaches from 3 directions. Mac and Tommy rigged improvised defenses at the vehicle ramps. Nothing elaborate, but enough to channel attackers into prepared positions. Doc set up medical station on the 3rd level, where Emma could help while staying protected. Father Brennan settled onto a concrete bench, and his weathered face showed exhaustion that went beyond physical injury. Cole, my boy, I'm slowing you down. Leave me with Emma and complete your mission. The suggestion made Cole's jaw tighten, because leaving people behind wasn't in his operational vocabulary, wasn't part of the code that had carried him through 3 combat tours and 100 impossible situations. I didn't carry you out of that church to abandon you in a parking garage. You're with us until this ends. Brendan's answering smile held the warmth that had comforted thousands of Marines who'd needed to hear they were worth saving. Sarah married a stubborn man. God rest her soul, I think she'd approve. The mention of his wife sent unexpected pain through Cole's chest because Sarah would have hated everything about this situation. The violence, the danger, Emma being caught in crossfire, she'd never asked for. But Sarah had also understood that some fights needed fighting, that evil unchecked was evil empowered, that men like Cole existed because the world wasn't kind to people who couldn't protect themselves. Emma appeared with water bottles scavenged from Doc's medical kit, and her hand found Cole's arm with the familiarity that had developed somewhere between the safe house and the tunnel. Federal authorities are coming. This ends soon. Her voice carried hope that Cole wanted to share, but couldn't quite manage because he'd seen too many operations go wrong in the final minutes, too many Marines who died in sight of extraction. Maybe. But Kane's not done yet. As if summoned by prophecy, Mac's voice came through tense with warning. Boss, we've got multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Black SUVs, aggressive driving patterns. Cole moved to the observation point and counted vehicles through binoculars that Reaper had carried from Sentinel. 6 SUVs meant at least 30 shooters, and Kane himself was visible in the lead vehicle's passenger seat. The man who'd been Cole's commanding officer 15 years ago was personally leading this assault, which meant Kane understood the stakes and had decided that eliminating witnesses was worth revealing himself. Reaper's voice carried the flat calm that marks snipers preparing to work. Boss, I've got clear shot on Kane. Say the word, and this ends. Cole's finger hovered over the radio transmit button, and 15 years of rage and betrayal compressed into this moment. Kane had corrupted everything he touched, had chosen power over honor, had built an empire on blood and suffering. One shot would end. It would balance ledgers written in the bodies of everyone Kane had destroyed. But Kane dead meant no testimony, no justice, no accountability beyond a bullet. Meant Emma would always wonder if they'd become the same kind of people they were fighting. Negative. We hold fire unless they breach. Let federal authorities take him alive. Reaper's acknowledgement came reluctant but professional, and Cole watched Kane's forces deploy with a tactical precision that marked serious professionals. They established perimeter position snipers began systematic sweep of the parking garage's lower levels. This wasn't assault, it was siege warfare with resources that would eventually crack any defense. Tommy's improvised charges detonated on the 2nd level, the blast channeling attackers into kill zones, where max fire exacted cost measured in bodies and screaming. But Kane's people pressed forward with the determination that came from understanding retreat meant facing their employer's wrath, and determination translated to casualties Cole's team couldn't afford. Doc took another hit, this time through his thigh, and Emma worked on him with hands that had learned field medicine in the last 72 hours. Her face was pale but focused, and she met Cole's eyes with something that looked like acceptance of whatever came next. How long until federal response? Cole checked his watch and felt his stomach tighten. 20 minutes, maybe less. Emma's laugh was brittle. That's a long time when people are shooting at you. The observation was accurate and unhelpful, and Cole returned to coordinating defense with the limited resources remaining. Ammunition was critical down to final magazines for most weapons. Medical supplies were exhausted treating Doc's wounds. The team was running on adrenaline and brotherhood, which carried operators further than civilians believed possible, but eventually failed when bodies and weapons ran dry. Kane's voice came through amplified speakers, echoing through the parking garage with cultured authority. Cole, this is pointless surrender. Emma Hayes and you all walk away. The offer was lie-wrapped in truth. Kane might let Cole's team survive, but Emma would die before federal authorities arrived. Cole's response carried the certainty that came from making peace with necessary sacrifices. Come and take her, the assault resumed with renewed fury, and Cole knew they'd reached the breaking point where skill couldn't overcome numbers. He moved to Emma's position and found her checking the rifle she'd taken from the safe house, fight her movements showing the training had stuck despite the chaos. If they breach this level, you run for the roof. Reaper will cover your extraction. Emma's eyes flashed with something that looked like anger. I'm not leaving you to die for me. You'll do what I tell you, because that's how we all survive. The command voice should have worked, but Emma stepped closer instead of backing down. No, I've run for 2 years. I'm done running. If we die together. The declaration was romantic and tactically stupid, and Cole wanted to argue that emotions didn't stop bullets or change battlefield mathematics. But Emma's hand found his face with surprising gentleness, and her next words hit harder than any incoming fire. You taught me to fight, so let me fight beside you. Before Cole could respond, the radio erupted with Reaper's urgent warning. Boss FBI hostage rescue just arrived 4 armored vehicles, full tactical team. The parking garage's street level suddenly filled with federal operators in black tactical gear, shields and automatic weapons that changed the equation from desperate defense to overwhelming force. Kane's people found themselves caught between Cole's team above and FBI below, and the smart ones dropped weapons and surrendered, while the stupid ones died trying to shoot their way clear. Kane himself stood in the parking garage's center, with hands raised, and his expression showed the particular rage that came from men who'd believed themselves untouchable. Learning they were very touchable, indeed. FBI agents swarmed him with practiced efficiency, cuffs, and custody that meant Kane's reign had ended in a Chicago parking garage instead of whatever private island he'd probably imagined retiring to. The lead FBI agent approached Cole's position, and her expression showed she'd been briefed on enough details to know this wasn't standard protective custody. Colonel Maddox, Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI hostage rescue. General Hastings sent us. Are you and your principal secure? Cole looked at Emma standing beside him, still holding the rifle at dock, being treated by FBI medics, at Reaper and Mac and Tommy, checking each other for injuries, and Father Brennan, offering prayers of thanksgiving. Looked at the bodies in brass and blood that marked where they'd held ground against overwhelming odds. We're secure. Principal is safe. Victor Kane is your prisoner. Agent Chen's answering smile held professional satisfaction. And Blake Mercer is singing like a canary at the federal building. Between his testimony and the digital evidence you provided, we've got enough to dismantle Kane's entire network. The words should have brought relief, but Cole felt only exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. He'd kept Emma alive, had protected. Father Brennan had completed the mission despite everything Kane had thrown at them. But the cost measured in bodies and trauma and permanent scars that would shape the rest of Emma's life. Emma's hand found his again, and her voice carried understanding that shouldn't be possible for someone who had only known violence for 72 hours. It's over. We won. Cole wanted to believe that, wanted to think winning was possible when the price was this high. But Father Brennan's voice carried the wisdom that came from decades ministering to warriors who'd survived battles but lost something in the winning. Victory isn't clean, child, but it's still victory. And you're both still breathing, which means tomorrow remains possible. The FBI secured the scene with professional efficiency, collecting evidence and taking statements and beginning the bureaucratic process that would eventually result in trials and sentences. General Hastings arrived 2 hours later with Pentagon authority and federal resources that made Chicago PD's earlier arrest warrants disappear into bureaucratic amnesia. She found Cole watching the sunset from the parking garage's roof, and her expression showed she understood the particular exhaustion that came from operations where everyone technically survived but nothing felt like victory. Hell of a job, Marine. Kane's network is finished. 3 countries have issued arrest warrants, 5 more are cooperating with investigations. You ended a terrorist operation that's been running for 15 years. The words were meant to comfort, but they landed flat because Cole was still calculating casualties, the dead on both sides. Doc's injuries that would require months of recovery. Father Brendan's trauma that prayer wouldn't completely heal, and Emma's innocence lost to violence she'd never asked to witness. How many died today, general total count? Hastings' face showed she'd expected the question. 42 confirmed. Kane's people mostly, but some civilian casualties from the church shooting. It'll be in the news cycle for weeks. 42 people dead because Blake Mercer had run a fraud and Victor Kane had decided loose ends needed elimination. The mathematics of violence never balanced, never made sense, never quite justified the cost, even when the alternative was letting evil flourish. Blake's testimony, how solid is it? Hastings pulled out a tablet showing legal documents that made Cole's head hurt. Federal prosecutors say it's airtight. Combined with the digital evidence and forensic accounting, Kane's looking at life without parole minimum. Possibly execution if we can prove the international terrorism charges. Cole nodded because justice mattered, because accountability was the difference between civilization and chaos. But justice didn't resurrect the dead or erase the nightmares that would haunt everyone who'd survived today. Emma appeared in the rooftop doorway, and Hastings gave Cole a knowing look before excusing herself with the professionalism that marked officers who understood when private conversations needed privacy. Emma moved to stand beside Cole, and they watched Chicago's lights emerging as darkness claimed the city. Blake's in federal custody. They're saying he'll testify against everyone, Kane, the corrupt cops, everyone involved in the fraud. Her voice carried something beyond relief, something that sounded like closure, or maybe just exhaustion that came from running out of adrenaline. You did it. You kept me alive until the system could work. Cole thought about that assessment and found it inadequate. We did it. You fought when you needed to, adapted when circumstances changed. You survived because you refused to quit. Emma's laugh was soft and bitter. I survived because a stubborn Marine refused to leave me behind. Don't minimize what you did, Cole. The moment stretched, and Cole became aware of how close they stood, how her shoulder pressed against his arm, how her breathing had synchronized with his somewhere during the chaos. He should step back, should maintain professional distance now that the operation had concluded. But Emma turned to face him, and her eyes held questions that went beyond tactical debriefs. What happens now after all this? Cole considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. In the immediate future came depositions and trials testimony and legal proceedings that would occupy months. Beyond that stretched uncertainty shaped by choices neither of them had made yet. You rebuild, start your business, help other fraud victims create something good from what Blake destroyed. Emma's hand came up to his chest, resting over the heart that had somehow kept beating through 3 combat tours in today's violence. And you, what do you do? The question shouldn't be complicated, but Cole found no easy answers. Sentinel security was burned compromised by Chicago PD's raid and Kane's assault. His team would scatter to other jobs, other cities, other missions. Father Brendan would recover and return to his shelter. And Cole would continue the work of protecting people who needed protection, because that was who he was, and changing identity wasn't possible when identity was carved from 25 years of service. Same thing I've always done. Find people who need help and help them. Emma's expression showed that wasn't the answer she wanted, but before she could press further, Mac appeared with news that demanded immediate attention. Boss Blake Mercer's asking to see Emma. Says he won't testify until he talks to her face to face. The revelation made Cole's jaw tighten because Blake had spent 2 years destroying Emma's life, and the idea of giving him one more opportunity to manipulate felt wrong on levels Cole couldn't quite articulate. But Emma's face showed determination that suggested she'd been waiting for this conversation. I'll see him. I need to look him in the eye and hear him explain why. Cole wanted to argue that Blake's explanations wouldn't satisfy that closure was myth sold to people who needed neat endings. But Emma had earned the right to face her demon, had earned the right to hear whatever pathetic justifications Blake offered for the destruction he'd caused. Then I'm coming with you. Emma's answering smile held gratitude and something warmer. I wouldn't want anyone else. The Dirksen Federal Building was fortress architecture translated to bureaucratic function, concrete and steel, designed to withstand everything short of military assault. FBI agents escorted Cole and Emma through security checkpoints that made airport screening look casual, and they emerged in an interview room where Blake Mercer sat handcuffed to a table that had seen thousands of confessions. Blake looked different than Cole's intelligence photos suggested, older, thinner, with the particular exhaustion that came from running for 2 years and finally accepting that running was finished. His eyes, when they met Emma's, held something that might have been regret if Cole was feeling charitable, though more likely was just self-pity that came from facing consequences. Emma, thank you for coming. Blake's voice carried the smooth charm that had probably convinced hundreds of people to trust him with their savings, and Cole watched Emma's expression harden as she recognized the manipulation even in apology. I didn't come to forgive you, I came to understand why. Blake's face cycled through emotions that looked rehearsed. Shame, sorrow, defensive, justification. When he spoke, his words sounded like they had been practiced in front of mirrors. I never meant for you to get hurt. The fraud was supposed to be victimless, just moving money from people who didn't need it to investments that would have paid everyone back eventually. The rationalization was pathetic and Emma's laugh was sharp enough to cut. Victimless, you destroyed families, stole retirements, used my credentials to legitimize theft on massive scale, and then you framed me and disappeared. Blake's composure cracked and something uglier showed beneath the charm. You could have stopped it. You signed documents without reading them. You trusted me because it was easier than asking questions. Cole's hand moved toward his weapon before conscious thought because blaming the victim was line even scum like Blake shouldn't cross. But Emma's hand on his arm stopped him, and her voice carried steel that made Blake flinch. You're right. I trusted you because I loved you. And you exploited that trust because you're a coward who preys on people's best qualities. But here's the difference between us, Blake. I learned from my mistakes. You're still making excuses. Blake's face went white, and Cole saw the moment when he realized Emma wasn't the same woman he'd manipulated 2 years ago. She'd been forged in violence and survival, had learned to fight back, had discovered strength that came from refusing to be victim anymore. Emma leaned forward, and her next words carried finality. You're going to testify. You're going to name every person involved in your schemes. And then you're going to prison for decades. And I'm going to rebuild my life while you rot. That's justice, Blake. And it's more than you deserve. She stood, and Cole rose with her, ready to leave Blake to whatever deals federal prosecutors had offered in exchange for testimony. But Blake's voice stopped them at the door. Emma, wait. Please, I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I'm sorry. Emma looked back, and her expression held something that looked like pity. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying hatred would make me like you. And I refuse to let you take anything else from me. The door closed on Blake's shocked face, and Cole found himself respecting Emma's strength more than he'd respected most operators he'd served with. She'd faced her destroyer and walked away intact, which was victory that had nothing to do with bullets and everything to do with refusing to be defined by trauma. The elevator descent was silent until Emma's shoulders started shaking, and Cole realized she was crying with the delayed shock that came from holding composure until safe to release it. He pulled her against his chest, and she sobbed with the kind of raw release that came from 2 years of suppressed emotion, finally breaking free. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clear, and her voice carried new strength. Thank you for being here, for protecting me, for seeing me as more than just another job. Cole's response came easier than expected. You were never just a dog. From the moment Father Brendan showed me your photo, you were someone worth protecting. Emma's hand came up to his face, and this time when she kissed him, there was no urgency, no fear. Just the gentle exploration that came from people discovering connection in the aftermath of chaos. Cole kissed back with the tentative hope that maybe life after violence was possible, that maybe Sarah and Katie would have approved of him finding reason to keep fighting. They broke apart when Mac cleared his throat from the elevator doorway, and his grin showed he'd been there long enough to witness more than professional courtesy. Boss hate to interrupt, but General Hastings wants final debrief. And Father Brendan says he's taking everyone to dinner because we survived, and that deserves celebrating. The debrief took 3 hours of detailed testimony about every phase of the operation, federal prosecutors and Pentagon officials taking notes that would eventually become classified reports that justified resources expended and lives lost. Cole answered with the mechanical precision that came from decades of after-action reports, but his mind kept drifting to Emma sitting beside him, her presence anchoring him to possibilities beyond just mission completion. Hastings concluded the session with news that made Cole's team relax for the first time since the church assault. Chicago PD has officially withdrawn all arrest warrants against Sentinel security personnel. Mayor's office is calling today's events isolated incident involving federal matters beyond local jurisdiction. Translation, they're pretending they weren't complicit in Kane's operations. Mac's snort conveyed what he thought of that translation, but political realities were above Cole's pay grade. What mattered was his team could return to Chicago without facing false charges, could rebuild Sentinel and continue the work of protecting people who needed protection. Dinner was at Castellano's because Father Brendan had insisted that returning to where everything started carried symbolic weight. The owner, Mr. Castellano himself, seated them at the best table with the kind of deference that came from FBI agents, explaining that the people who destroyed his kitchen during the wine incident had actually saved countless lives. The team gathered around the table, and Cole looked at the faces of men who'd followed him through Hellmac with his arm in a sling, but grin intact. Doc hobbling on crutches, but already planning a return to operational status. Reaper quiet but present, Tommy nervous energy, finally channeling into actual enjoyment. Father Brendan led a prayer that thanked God for protection and asked blessing on those who'd fallen, and even Cole, who'd stopped believing in divine intervention years ago, found himself murmuring, Amen. Emma sat beside him wearing a dress she'd borrowed from someone because all her clothes had been lost in the safe house destruction, and her hand found his under the table with the casual intimacy that suggested they'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Cole should probably worry about that, should consider the complications that came from relationships born in combat. But Sarah's voice in his memory whispered that life was short and love was rare, and Cole had learned through her death that waiting for perfect timing meant missing everything that mattered. Mac raised his glass, and his voice carried the weight of brotherhood forged through shared danger. To the boss who taught us that protecting the innocent isn't just a job, it's who we are. The team echoed the toast, and Cole felt the familiar weight of command mixed with something new, something that looked like hope for futures beyond just mission completion. Emma's toast came next, her voice steady despite everything she'd endured. To second chances, and to the people who make them possible. The dinner stretched into evening as stories emerged, Mac recounting the estate infiltration, Reaper describing his sniper work during the church battle, Tommy detailing the tunnel rigging with explosive expertise that made civilians nervous and operators appreciative. Emma listened with the fascination that came from understanding she'd survived something extraordinary, and her questions showed she was processing trauma into narrative that made sense. Father Brendan pulled Cole aside after dessert, and his weathered face showed concern that went beyond physical injuries. My boy, what happens with you and Emma? After all this, the question should have been simple, but Cole found complicated answers. I don't know, Father. She deserves better than a burned-out Marine with nightmares and 25 years of baggage. Brendan's laugh was gentle. Perhaps, but what she wants might matter more than what you think she deserves. Have you asked her? Oe looked across the table to where Emma was laughing at something Tommy said, her face transformed from the terrified woman in Castellano's kitchen 72 hours ago. She caught him watching and smiled with the kind of warmth that made his chest tighten. Not yet. Brendan's hand found his shoulder with surprising strength. Then ask. Sarah would want you to be happy. Katie would want you to live, not just survive. Give yourself permission to have more than missions and memories. The words landed with weight that Cole carried through the evening and into the drive back to the hotel, where FBI had secured rooms for everyone involved in testimony. Emma rode with him instead of in the federal vehicle assigned to her protective detail, and the drive through Chicago's night was quiet until she broke the silence. I've been thinking about what comes next. After testimony and trials, Cole kept his eyes on the road but his attention on her. And I want to start the consulting business, help people who've been where I was. But I also want... She trailed off, and Cole risked a glance to find her watching him with expression that held vulnerability and determination. I want you. If you'll have me. The declaration should have terrified him, should have triggered all the defenses he'd built against connection after losing Sarah and Katie. But instead, Cole felt something that looked like relief, like permission to stop punishing himself with isolation. I'm 51. You're 29. I have nightmares and scars, and I'm not always good at emotions. Emma's hand found his on the gear shift. And I have trauma from Blake and trust issues, and I'm learning to shoot because I never want to feel helpless again. We're both damaged. Maybe we can be damaged together. Cole pulled over because some conversations required full attention, and when he turned to face Emma, her eyes held certainty that made his remaining objections seem hollow. I'm not good at relationships. Sarah and I had 20 years to figure each other out, and even then I failed her by not being there when Emma's fingers pressed against his lips, stopping words that had haunted him for 5 years. You didn't fail her. A drunk driver failed her. And Cole, she's gone. I'm here and I'm choosing you despite knowing exactly who you are and what you've done. The kiss was longer this time, deeper, carrying promise beyond just survival. When they broke apart, Cole found words that had been locked away since the funeral. I love you. I don't know when it happened or how it's possible after 3 days, but I love you. Emma's smile was radiant. I love you too. Now take me to the hotel before I do something inappropriate in your truck. The laugh that escaped Cole was genuine and surprised him with its presence because humor had been scarce commodity for 5 years. But Emma made him laugh, made him hope, made him believe that maybe Father Brendan was right and permission to be happy didn't require suffering forever. 6 months later, Cole stood in Veterans Memorial Park watching hundreds of people gather for the annual ceremony honoring fallen soldiers. He wore dress uniform with medals and ribbons that documented 25 years of service, and Emma stood beside him in elegant dress that suggested her consulting business was thriving. The invitation to speak had come from the ceremony organizers who'd heard about his role stopping Kane's terrorist network, and Cole had accepted because some messages needed saying. He approached the podium and looked out at a crowd that included veterans and families, people who understood sacrifice, and people who were just learning its weight. My name is Cole Maddox. I served 25 years in the Marine Corps. His voice carried across the park steady despite nerves that hadn't troubled him in combat situations. I lost brothers in Fallujah and Kandahar in places whose names are still classified. For a long time I thought I died with them, that I was just going through motions. He found Emma in the crowd and her encouraging nod gave him strength to continue. But 6 months ago I was reminded why we serve, why we sacrifice. Not for glory or medals, but for people who can't protect themselves. The crowd was silent, and Cole saw understanding in the veterans' faces. Every warrior here knows that feeling, the need to stand between evil and innocence. We don't always win. We don't always come home whole. But we keep standing because that's what warriors do. He paused, and his next words came from deeper places than tactical knowledge. I dedicate this memorial to my wife Sarah and daughter Katie, taken too soon by senseless violence, and to all families who've lost loved ones to evil that shouldn't exist but does. His voice threatened to break, but he pushed through. Your loved ones didn't die in vain, because their memory drives us to be better, to protect harder, to never quit. And to those still serving, know that your sacrifice matters, that protecting innocence is the highest calling, that honor and brotherhood transcend everything else. The applause was thunderous, and Cole returned to Emma's side feeling lighter somehow, like speaking Sarah and Katie's names had released pressure he'd been carrying. Emma's hand found his, and her whisper carried warmth. They would be proud. I'm proud. The ceremony concluded with 21-gun salute that made Cole's chest tighten with familiar grief, but grief tempered now by hope for futures that included Emma's smile and the consulting business she was building, and the possibility that protecting others could coexist with being protected yourself. Father Brendan found them after, and his blessing was simple. You've found peace, my boy. Finally, the team reunion that evening was exactly what warriors needed. Mac, bringing stories from his new security consulting firm in Denver. Doc limping but functional after months of physical therapy. Reaper showing photos from the gun range he'd opened. Tommy describing demolition contracts that were definitely legal even if the clients weren't. They toasted absent friends and shared stories that grew with each retelling. And Cole watched his brothers with the satisfaction that came from knowing they'd all survived and were building lives worth living. Emma fit naturally into the group, and watching her laugh at Mac's jokes made something in Cole's chest warm. Later at the house Cole had purchased because living at Sentinel HQ stopped making sense, Emma emerged from the bathroom with expression that held nervousness and joy. I need to tell you something. Cole's tactical brain ran worst-case scenarios before Emma's next words demolished every assumption. I'm pregnant, about 8 weeks. The world stopped, then restarted with different parameters. Cole crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling Emma against him with the fierce protectiveness that came from understanding exactly how precious life was. You're sure doctor confirmed it today? I wanted to wait until I was certain before Cole kissed her, cutting off explanation that wasn't necessary, and when he pulled back his eyes were wet. Sarah would have loved this. Katie too. They would have loved you. Emma's tears matched his. Tell me about them. Really tell me. I want to know everything. They talked into the night, Cole sharing memories he'd locked away for 5 years, Sarah's laugh, Katie's determination to help people, the life they'd built before drunk driver destroyed everything. And Emma listened without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, just offering presence and understanding that some wounds never completely healed, but could be lived with. When Cole finally slept, nightmares that had plagued him for years were absent, replaced by dreams that included Emma's smile and child who would carry Sarah and Katie's legacy forward. 1 year later, Cole stood in a small church holding his daughter, Emily, Sarah Maddox, named for both grandmothers she'd never meet, but whose strength ran through her veins. Emma watched from the front pew, recovered from childbirth, and radiant in the way that came from building life instead of just surviving. Father Brendan conducted the baptism with the gentle authority that came from blessing thousands of new lives, and his prayer asked protection for Emily and guidance for her parents. Max stood as godfather, with Doc and Reaper flanking brothers, becoming family in the way that mattered most. The ceremony concluded with gathering at Cole and Emma's home team reunion that had become regular occurrence. Mac brought news that Blake Mercer had been sentenced to 25 years without parole, and Kane had received life sentence in federal supermax prison. Justice had been slow but thorough, and Emma's testimony had been instrumental in convictions that dismantled an international criminal network. Cole held his daughter and looked at the people gathered in his home, warriors who'd become family, a woman who'd become his reason for fighting, a child who represented hope for futures beyond just mission completion. Father Brennan approached with blessing that felt like benediction. "You've built something beautiful, my boy. Life from death, hope from despair. This is what warriors do when they stop fighting long enough to live." Cole thought about that assessment and found truth in places he'd never expected. He'd spent 25 years protecting strangers, then 5 years punishing himself for failing to protect the people who mattered most. But Emma had taught him that protection and living weren't mutually exclusive, that warriors could defend innocence and still build families worth defending. Emily stirred in his arms and her eyes opened, Sarah's eyes carrying curiosity that would someday become Katie's determination to help people. Cole felt the weight of responsibility that came from raising a daughter in a world that wasn't always kind, but he also felt the support of brothers who'd proven that standing together made impossible things possible. Emma moved to his side, and her hand on his shoulder carried warmth that had become home. "What are you thinking?" Cole looked at his daughter, at his wife, at the family he'd built from ashes of loss and trauma. "That I spent 5 years believing I was dead inside. That my purpose died with Sarah and Katie. But Emma showed me that warriors don't retire, we just find new battles, new people to protect, new reasons to keep fighting." He kissed Emily's forehead, then Emma's lips, and his next words came from places deeper than tactical knowledge. "And maybe, just maybe, we find peace." Emma's smile showed she understood everything he couldn't quite say. "We've found it. Together." Through the window, Chicago's lights glittered like promises kept and battles won. Cole Maddox, Marine protector, warrior, held his family and felt something he'd thought died in a car crash 5 years ago. Hope. For tomorrow, for Emily's future, for life. That meant more than just survival. The team raised glasses in toasts that honored the fallen and celebrated the living. And Cole's response carried certainty that had carried him through impossible situations. Semper Fidelis, always faithful, always protecting, always remembering, but also always living, always hoping, always believing that warriors could find peace after the fighting stopped. Emily yawned, and Cole's world narrowed to her perfect features, to the responsibility and joy that came from protecting innocents who trusted you with their lives. He'd spent 25 years serving that mission in foreign lands, and now he'd spend the rest of his life serving it at home. The work continued. The mission never ended. But the mission had expanded to include more than just survival, to encompass the beautiful complexity that came from love and family and brotherhood. And that Cole finally understood was victory worth everything it had cost to achieve.